current COVID-19 panic has opened up a great opportunity for governments, not content with the level of control that they currently enjoy over their populations, to introduce a new method. The comparisons have been made to former governments, such as Nazi Germany, with their modern democracies evolving into pseudo-totalitarian states, equating into socialist-orientated governments. Today, the COVID-19 passport is the new Star of David. Papers, please, is becoming the new mantra. The medical community is still divided on the efficacy of these various vaccines. There have been deadly results, and in many cases, COVID infections have still proliferated even in the most highly injected populations, such as Israel. If the liberal New World Order needs to find a way to establish itself, look only to Australia's draconian measures that violate even the most rudimentary concepts of medical logic and human rights. My guest on the show has a niece living in Sydney and a friend in Melbourne. They live with it. What is the next step? Ghettos for isolating the vaccinated from the unvaccinated? In the USA, the Food and Drug Administration has been erroneously reported as having approved the vaccines. In addition, the pharmaceutical companies have been given immunity from any liability for any adverse effects of the drugs that many of their own people refuse to take. Let that sink in. Ever heard of thalidomide? The first step of any state pretender to dictatorial power is to find a target audience, focus the national attention upon a select group, ridicule, and then marginalise them, and finally remove them from the equation. Sound familiar? It should. That's why we had the Nuremberg and Tokyo War Crimes Tribunals. My guest on the show today is Colin Heaton. He has served in the US Army and US Marines and was a professor of history at American Military University. He's been working as a consultant for film and TV, specialising in documentaries. He's currently working with producers, directors, including Steven Spielberg. In this episode, I managed to satisfy much of my curiosity regarding World War II and the Third Reich, and Colin really is a true expert in the field, and anyone who is a student of history and finds the subject interesting will absolutely enjoy this podcast. Okay, let's go! Welcome to the Nico Show, Colin. It was great to get to know you last week, talk about history. I'm so excited to do this show. I think you've got an important message to share today and important parallels. How are you doing today?
Oh, doing pretty good. How about you?
Yeah, okay, mate. Just finished my client work, got the development done, and now we're ready to talk history.
Well, that's my job.
Whereabouts are you based?
North Carolina.
Okay, cool. So basically, Colin is one of the world's experts in the Third Reich. I probably butchered that word because I'm still knackered from today's work. The Third Reich. And he has basically, he's known some of the characters in World War II and some of the veterans, and he consults on various movies and for historical accuracy. But in general, just knows a lot about history as well. Just wonder if you get us a little bit of your background in history.
Oh, right now I've been working with Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks production as a researcher for their fourth series, which is filming now with Dale Dye. Many people may know him from acting and directing, and his influence and involvement with films such as Platoon, Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, Pacific, all kinds of films. And then, of course, working with my producers, directors, and other people putting this package together for the film based upon my book, The Star of Africa. And so it's busy, exhausting.
So how do you, as a historian, get to that high level where people like Steven Spielberg want to work with you?
Mostly recommendations. I spent a lot of time doing TV documentaries, either on camera or as researchers for various organizations, talking head stuff sometimes. And the books help because when these directors start looking and doing these historical films, they'll research it, or they'll have someone hired to do the research. They'll research and they'll go, well, this guy wrote this book about this. This book covers this. So contact this guy, see if he's interested. And that's usually how it works out. And if I've worked with other people and they're brought into a project, they'll say, well, we've worked with Colin Heaton before, and we've worked with guys like Barrett Tillman, John Goodman, guys I work with. We're a team. And so they'll reach out to us and ask us, give us a synopsis of what it's about, look at it and say, yeah, we can do this. Or if one of us has a greater expertise than the other, then we'll pass them on to the person who has the most knowledge of the subject. With me, German military subjects, all of us cover that. But if it's Victorian England tea settings, then I'm sorry, I can't help you. But if it's military history of any degree or level, then yeah, I'm your generalist and sometimes a specialist. But if I don't know, if I know someone in the business who's a far more expert on something than I am, then I'll say, okay, yeah, I can help you with this, but I know somebody that's their specialty. Go to this guy, because you want to keep the history true, accurate. You want to keep it flowing. You want to have good people involved in good projects. So you could wing it as a historian, but then again, you look like an idiot. And I prefer to share the wealth because I get job referrals from other historians as well. So we help each other out.
Did you study at university?
Yep. UNC Wilmington in North Carolina, then Temple University in Pennsylvania. And then I went to Strathclyde in Glasgow.
The same university as me. And that's how we connected, because originally, when I first skimmed your profile, I thought you were actually at the same time. Actually, you were actually at the same time as me, because I was at Strathclyde 2002 to 2007. And you were
2002 was my last year. Yeah, so that was the last year.
Did you go to the Students' Union? This is funny. Did you?
I did go to the Students' Union. I was also working as a tutor, and so in the history department. So then I did great, because when I had to fly around in Europe and go to archives, the department paid for my plane tickets and expenses. So that was cool. That's
just so funny. Like it's such a small world, man. You think that your university and I was at the same one, at the same time. Ridiculous.
Yeah. It was a good time. I got to I taught there. I did also exam proctoring, but I also did some minor teaching over at the University of Glasgow under Professor Hugh Strachan, the preeminent World War I historian, and that was interesting. He's one of the icons in the business. So yeah, it was an interesting time. I never really lived in a place that had so much rain, but I got used to it.
Did you ever notice like the second floor of the Student Union like had these cracks in the floor, and the place like continually stunk of old moldy beer? Or did you not?
Well, yeah. The odor of mold is always present most places in Glasgow because of the dampness. In fact, when I first got to Glasgow in 1998, I spent 2 weeks chronically ill because I wasn't used to the mold that I had to inhale, and they stuck me in a temporary housing unit down near it was down near Calcaddens, I think, and I was stuck there for like 2 weeks until I could get into graduate housing, and it was horrific. I mean, it was small, cramped, moldy, damp, and every time I wanted electricity, I had to put like coins in the box and turn a knob, and I'm like, what? This is crazy. So yeah, that was. I've been to 40 countries, and I've been to places where a 4-star hotel is a hole in the ground with a canvas tent over it. Because I am former military, so you learn hard shit. But that was eye-opening.
So, how many years did you spend in academia?
Off and on total. Let's see. Well, I was teaching when I had my master's, 98, 2000. 12 years.
12 years. So that's like three degrees you got?
Yeah. Plus the honorary. Yeah, I've got 3 plus the honorary, but I don't teach anymore. I mean, in my country, if you're not a flag-waving liberal Democrat, they pretty much force you out of academia because they polluted and infested the entire academic organizations. So back in what was it? 2009. Yeah, 2009. They decided to cull the herd and get rid of a bunch of us after I'd been there at I'd been there at the American Military University. I'd been there for 7 years. I created their Holocaust Studies department. I created comparative genocide studies. I created the History of Africa program, a bunch of sub courses for that. But then a group bought the university out, and they totally changed hands. And then they went public on the stock exchange in 2007. They went public, and then from that point forward, it was a matter of shareholders. So I was, running a lot of students and making pretty good wages, but I guess I figured they could take people fresh out of the gate for a lot cheaper. Plus the fact that it was a very heavily liberalized institution at that time. So then they began just filtering us out. And so I began doing the film work, TV consultancy, writing books.
So before you were about 12 years into your career, slash studies, did you get a specialization into the Third Reich then?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the MPhil degree that I received was European Studies, but my focus and concentration for that area of study, 2 books came out of that. But my area of concentration was partisan and guerrilla warfare during the German occupations of Europe. And the primary focus was Eastern European resistance groups and the German occupation, to include Ukraine, Russia, primarily the Eastern Front, using my interviews and research to examine the occupations of those locations by the German forces, but also doing a comparative analysis of their actions and likewise the actions of the Soviet military, and doing that, throwing it against the backdrop of the Geneva Convention of 1929 and the Hague Conventions, which were in effect at that time, and examining various well-documented and some not so well-documented actions of crimes against humanity. That was eye-opening for a lot of people, because just because the Germans went into a village and pulled a bunch of people out and machine gunned them to death, people would say, oh, that's a war crime. Well, technically not. Not the way Geneva 29 was written. So you have to examine, do a forensic autopsy on the action, look at the paperwork, look at the history, and then compare that to the law. And in many cases, what people would consider to be an egregious action was not illegal at all under Geneva. So that's what I did. I did a examination of those actions, compared it to the law, and explained what was illegal, what was not illegal, which I found interesting later, because some of the generals in Afghanistan and Iraq actually used my book to compare their actions and what they could do legally, not just according to the rules of engagement, but according to international law. So that
Jeez, man, what a burden to live under like that. To think that
I don't think so.
Justify their actions with.
Well, it all depends upon where it falls under international law, the laws of warfare and the rules of engagement. The military, we operate under rules of engagement, which means that the commanding general through the Joint Chiefs, through the president, set the rules of engagement. I'll give you an example. When my son was in Afghanistan, first tour, if they saw a guy with a cell phone, that was a target indicator. They knew he was going to detonate something. And so he was a target of opportunity. You could take him out. Under the second deployment he did under Obama, the rules of engagement changed. You couldn't engage anybody, even if they had weapons, unless they fired at you. You could not fire at them. And usually by the time they fired at you, they'd already radioed your location for artillery to hit you. So they took more casualties. So the target of opportunity factor went out the window. You had to basically wait to be hit before you could hit back, which is something that I could never understand. So rules of engagement change with administrations, but the laws of war have not changed since the Geneva Convention was revised in 1949. And those laws are pretty clear. And there is still some ambiguity in the laws of warfare. And I actually petitioned to have the Geneva Convention of 49 rewritten, redrafted, and to be target specific to insurgency warfare. Asymmetrical warfare is now the order of the day. The days of major armies lining up against each other on opposing lines of departure, what we call the forward edge of the battle area, that doesn't happen anymore. It's all about insurgency, counterinsurgency, interdiction, and the laws of warfare as written years ago are not applicable to that type of warfare. Then it gets into a gray area, which gets people in trouble. And you want to eliminate the gray zone. In the military, we live by a very simple methodology, the black and the white, black, white, right, wrong. The gray zone is what we call the dead zone. If you're in the gray area and you can't make a decision rapidly and accurately, you're either dead or you're in trouble. So commanders want to know what their limitations are on the rules of engagement and what their legal position is with regard to the post-action, after-action reports, because they don't want to have it get into a firefight and find out that some lawyer sitting back there with a journalist reporting on it says, well, we think they violated the laws of war because they did this. Commanders don't need that extra burden. They don't need the burden because they've got enough to deal with command and control, the fog of war, maintaining discipline in the unit, controlling fire, calling for airstrikes, retrograde operations. All of these things are taking place at the same time in a commander's head. The last thing he needs to worry about is whipping out his book and going, page so-and-so, what does it say about me firing on this village if I take RPG? Oh, okay. By that time, you're dead.
Just be careful with your wire, because it's sort of, when it moves around, it's getting some interference. So I'll let you know if it happens again, but just...
Okay. But like I say, taking away the ambiguity of warfare, clarifying the rules of war, clarifying the rules of engagement, which is something that was very confusing to German forces and Allied forces in World War II. Yeah, the Geneva Convention was standing doctrine, but how do you work within that framework in the middle of a firefight? You can't always, hey, blow a whistle. There's no timeout. There's no halftime and go, let me check the rule book and see what I can do to you. So that's the biggest problem we have with warfare today.
So you said 2 or 3 minutes ago that the Nazis in one of those countries could basically machine gun a whole village, but that wasn't illegal. Can you just specify why it wasn't illegal?
Yeah, absolutely. If German forces were attacked by partisan or guerrilla units, and in my book, my first book, I actually created the legal definitions to distinguish between partisans, guerrillas, terrorists, and freedom fighters, which had never been done before. I created those terms legally. If the German forces take fire and casualties from civilians not in uniform, not covered by the Geneva Convention, and the German forces moved into a village and they found weapons, they found captured German equipment, or if there's anything that could tie those people to the attack, then under the Geneva Convention, they had no protection under international law, and they could be summarily executed in the field if two things occurred. One, a field tribunal, which rarely happened. And a field tribunal, if it found a declaration of guilt, had to be sanctioned by a general grade officer. A general grade officer had to approve a sentence of death. Okay, that most of the time that never happened. The Germans didn't go through the protocols of a trial. They just found the stuff. Oh, okay, come to this ditch we just dug for you, and killed them. That part of it sometimes was illegal because you have to follow the protocols under Geneva 29, which means that you have to actually have an established charge sheet. You have to have a jury of 3 officers, 3 field grade officers is what it requires. And then if a sentence of death is pronounced, it has to be signed off by a general officer. But the Germans really did that. Generally, the German officers, to cover their ass, basically would be, okay, if you find these people, I give you my authorization to execute them under Geneva 29. And that's what they did. And
that seems so crazily convenient for war crimes. Like, who wrote this Geneva Convention? It just seems so loosely worded.
It is loosely worded. That's the reason. And in 1949, they changed the Geneva Convention after World War II because of the Crimes Against Humanity clause. After the Nuremberg trials, the Dachau trials, the Tokyo trials, they rewrote Geneva 49 and had inclusions. I think actually Article 8 has most of those inclusions that stipulates that what we call collective punishment with regard to punishing a collective group of people with the actions of a few is illegal. You can't do that. You have to be target specific in the people you're going to prosecute for violating the rules of war. Meaning, if a partisan, guerrilla, whatever they call themselves, whatever their actions are, if they get caught in an action out of uniform, without military affiliation, without identification, then they have no protection. But you can't just kill them. Okay, they clarified that in 49. You have to have a tribunal. which is why we had Guantanamo Bay. We catch all these idiots in Afghanistan or Iraq and you throw them in Guantanamo Bay, you charge them and you wait years until the situation's over, because then you want to put them on trial. And then, of course, you get people like Obama who released these people, and now these same people he released from Guantanamo are now running Kabul, Afghanistan. It's very convoluted. It's very complex. That's why the lawyers get involved. I am not a lawyer, and I don't play one on television. But I do understand the laws of warfare because I've studied it. I had to. And that's why I wanted clarification for the forces in the field, not just our forces, but British forces, Germans, Australians, whoever's active, Canadians, whoever was active in the field. Hopefully they would have a more clear view of what they are allowed to do versus what they should not do to keep people out of trouble. It's okay to kill bad guys. I'm a firm believer that some people just got to go. Not a problem. But you want to make sure that you're selective and you're proper in the method and how you do take out people, and you're taking out the right people. So that's when it becomes complicated, because in Afghanistan and Iraq and those places, Somalia, you know, where I was, I mean, you couldn't tell good guys from bad guys until they fired at you. Once they shot at you, then, oh, I guess he's not on our side. You can drop this guy. But until that happens, they could be walking around you, you know, nowadays in Afghanistan, Iraq, wearing suicide vests, on cell phones, detonating remote IEDs. It's crazy. And you can't just kill them because you suspect something. You have to have inherent knowledge or evidence or intelligence telling you that this specific person is about to detonate an IED, which is almost impossible to get before something tragic happens. So, yeah, it is a nasty business, and the laws of war do have to be applied. But how those laws are applied is often dependent upon the commander in the field. And the commander in the field doesn't always have the luxury of kicking back and doing research, especially when he's trying to keep his men alive.
Were you in the Army before you did your academic studies?
I was in the Army and the Marines. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And when you're in, people are in the Army, and you've probably looked at statistics, how long of living under that constant threat of IEDs do you think it takes for the average person to become like permanently disabled from PTSD or just the damage psychologically?
Well, my son did 2 tours. He survived 6 IED blasts that killed a lot of his platoon on the second tour. His job was combat engineer. His job was to find the IEDs. And when they would find the IEDs, sometimes they would find one and mark it for the bomb disposal to take it out and then sweep forward to secure the area. But as soon as you found the IED, you have some raghead on a ridgeline with a cell phone waiting to detonate it once the team comes in to take out. So that's the guy you want to kill. You want to take out the guy with the cell phone who's going to detonate the IED if possible. The problem with the psychological impact of that is something that I never had to experience. I never had to deal with that. I can't even imagine. I know my son has PTSD, and he, you know, he's dealt with it pretty well. And you know, the trauma of not knowing every day when you walk outside the wire if you're going to come back or, you know, lose a piece of your body, all because you know for a fact that the guy you saw that night looking through the night vision devices, you saw him planting something beside of the road. In the old days, you could take him out. Under the rules of engagement he was under, you couldn't take him out because you didn't know what he was planting. They could be saying, oh, he's planting an opium plant. You don't know if it was an IED, not until you walk past it. And then, of course, it detonates. So that stress had to be heavy. I had a lot of my students who were satellite students remote in Afghanistan and Iraq when I was teaching, and they dealt with that all the time. And some of them got hurt badly. I lost a couple who were killed. But no, you can't even imagine going to your car every single day, not knowing if you touch that door handle or if you turn that ignition, if it's going to blow up. Okay. So that put that in your mindset as a comparative analysis to what these guys are going through. Or if you turn the doorknob in your house, is it going to trigger a tripwire and set off a mercury trigger device? That's the daily life that these guys lived under, which most people can't even begin to understand. I mean, their idea of a bad day is possibly their coffee maker quit working. You know, these guys, their idea of when they have a bad day, they're putting people in body bags and they're having to write out reports. And commanders have to write letters to families. That's a bad day. So when I hear the civilians want to criticize the military, people who've never served, I tell them, why don't you step back and just consider this? You have a very comfortable life because for generations, better people than you have put on the uniform and gone in harm's way to make sure you're safe. So if we had lost 2 world wars, you might not even be speaking your native language, and you sure as hell wouldn't be living in what you call a democracy. So just think about that.
Yeah, democracy. So we could talk a lot about the military, but I really want to take this opportunity to sort of compare your notes on the Third Reich and my notes, because I've been fascinated with the Third Reich ever since I watched every documentary on Hitler and the rest on the History Channel. But I've not read too many books. I've read 1 or 2. But the question that I really have is basically based on your world-leading expertise on the Third Reich, the mechanisms that they used, Hitler and his henchmen, and the processes leading up to that, and the changes in society. How much parallels do you see between what happened back then to what we're seeing now with new laws for emergency laws for COVID and the whole thing we're all dealing with right now?
Well, there is a similarity and there is a distinction. I'll give you the similarity. Australia is a great example. They're utilizing police forces and military forces to institute a type of martial law in New South Wales. I just got off a Zoom meeting last night with a friend of mine in Australia about this film, which is where we may make this movie. They're living under draconian policies where you can't even leave your house, and you have to get permission to do anything because of this extremely overblown paranoia about this flu. It's a flu, okay? It's a flu, okay? We lose 300, 400,000 people a year in this country due to flu. But in the last year of COVID, it seems like nobody ever died of flu. It's all COVID. They're putting these restrictions and pressures on societies in order to control them. How do you control people in a country where the population has 400 million guns and 330 million people? Well, you try to executive order or legislate laws to keep them locked up, to keep them in place, and regulate their movements, restrict their movements, control their thought processes. Well, in this country, that's not going to work. We kicked the British out of this country twice. You think we're going to let some idiot Democrat run our lives? What the hell, no.
No chance, man.
And so anyway, but as far as the Europeans go, the Europeans in general are used to what we call strongman rule, whether it was kings or dictators. They don't like it, but they're used to it. They know how to accept it. I had a very interesting talk with a guy named Eric Heider once. I guess you know who he was. And very interesting guy. And he was the president of Austria at the time. And I had a talk with him once back in 98, I guess, 99. And he said he was very opposed to having the immigrants from Serbia and Bosnia fleeing into his country because of the civil war in the 90s. And he was saying that we are Austrians, and if you want to come here, then you must become an Austrian. You cannot secularize yourself with your religion. If you're a Muslim, you cannot do this. You can't set up madrasas. You have to follow the law, this, that, the other. And he was like, they called him a socialist because he wanted to keep Austrian integrity socially, legally, and educationally under the umbrella of a unified nation. And so they called him a socialist. They called him a dictator and all this other stuff, you know. So he accepted that. And I asked him, I said, well, why do you say to the people who oppose your viewpoints on unfettered immigration coming into your country? And he said it very simple. He said, to hell with them. He said, these are the same people who wouldn't have minded the Nazis occupying Vienna like they did in 38 because they simply do not mind being told what to do. Personally, me, I don't let anyone tell me what to do. And if I'm going to protect my country, then that means protecting its borders. That means protecting its laws, its citizens. And if you're going to come to this country, then we're going to make sure you're the kind of people we want to be in Austria. Well, in my opinion, that's the right of every sovereign nation. We have an administration right now. Donald Trump secured the border. He was completing the wall. We had a 90% drop in illegal immigration, the highest drop in illegal immigration in our nation's history. Now, with 7 to 8 months of Biden, we have the largest explosion of illegal immigration and invasion in our country's history. Okay, because that tells you the difference between a nationalist-minded person, and I don't mean nationalist in a socialist nationalist mindset. I mean nationalist in the sense of someone who cares enough about their country to protect the people living in it. At the expense of others, maybe, but guess what? Those other people, when we have hurricanes, earthquakes, and forest fires, natural disasters, most of these countries don't send us money in foreign aid. We're sending their dumbasses foreign aid. Okay, we're sending dictatorships foreign aid. We're giving Pakistan $4.2 billion a year because they're a nuclear power and we want to keep them from going to war with India. Pakistan's been harboring the terrorists in Afghanistan for 2 decades. They're not our friend. Okay, my example, pull the money away from Pakistan, give that money to India and say, if Pakistan gets too froggy, nuke the hell out of Islamabad. Screw them. Okay, but that's me.
Okay, cool.
I'm a firm believer. Comes to a country protecting its own citizens above and beyond the needs of others. Why? Because if our nation had not been a nationalist-minded country in both world wars, we would not have been the so-called arsenal of democracy, creating weaponry and supplying the world to defeat fascism in both oceans. We couldn't have done it if we had not been the country that we are. And other countries did not allow themselves to maintain that free market capitalist system and industrialization. And when they did, they were restricted or they were marginalized to where they could not be at their full potential, which is why they fell victim. So I would much rather be a guy with my weapon standing in the doorway than be a guy wishing I had a weapon when they crashed through my doorway.
There's going to be a lot of my listeners absolutely cheering you like crazy right now. I can just imagine some of them. Probably the largest audience is in America. But let's just go back to the parallels, because I think that's the most interesting thing that we can talk about right now is that, so you're saying there's similarities between the Third Reich and New South Wales, Australia. And what about the rest of the world? And what are the non-similarities?
Well, it depends. It depends upon which degree they go to lock down their populations. I understand the paranoid, uneducated paranoia of governments believing that these cloth masks are going to stop a virus, which is not going to do. If you don't have an N95 industrial grade respirator, you're not stopping anything. You're just breathing your own CO2 back in. So these people seem to think they're going to stop a virus by putting a cloth mask on. Well, good luck with that. If you can fill your car with petrol, gasoline as we call it, if you can go to the gas station, fill your car with petrol and smell the fumes, you're not stopping a virus. Okay? People don't get this. So they've got this false sense of security that the government says, well, if we all mask up, we're going to be safe. No, you're just one of the collective idiots who believes that stupidness. It's not going to happen. You're not going to stop the virus. It's not going to stop that way. And the inoculations, the vaccines. First of all, I am totally pro-vaccine in every single scenario where the vaccine has been proven effective. None of these vaccines to me have been proven effective. You know why they haven't been proven effective? Real simple. Because if they were proven effective, the efficacy standards would have been met. Our Food and Drug Administration would have sanctioned all of these. The European Union would have sanctioned these things, but they haven't. They haven't sanctioned them. They're just using emergency issue ordinances to say, okay, we have these vaccines. You have to get inoculated because this is for the good of the public. But they're ignoring the fact that there are a lot of people dying and having side effects of these vaccines. I'm not saying everyone's going to die if they get a vaccine. I know people who have it and they're fine. I know 2 people who had adverse reactions. One, I think, died because of the vaccine. One size does not fit all. Just because someone has an infection, if a man is 240 pounds and has an infection versus a woman who's 105 pounds, you don't give them the same amount of penicillin. Some people can't take penicillin. Some people have to take synthetics. So if you think one size fits all for a drug, then you're an idiot. And people are saying, well, the countries are being locked down until people get vaccinated to protect the population. But they have no verification or vindication of the efficacy of those medications. And another thing I would say is, well, remember back in the 1950s and early 60s, they had this drug called thalidomide. And they thought, oh, thalidomide is going to be great for helping pregnant women with depression and postpartum and all this weirdness. Well, it ended up being the greatest debacle in drug history because it created birth defects on a scale never seen in mankind's history. not even with radiation poisoning after Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Okay. So then they took that drug off the market because it was proven to be deadly. I think the age of COVID, give the next 2, 3, maybe 5 years at the most, I think you're going to find there's a lot that's good in this drug, but I think you're going to find a lot that's very detrimental to a lot of people because they haven't done the field studies. In fact, getting these inoculations under mandate is the field study. We are the laboratory. Okay. We are the lab rats getting these drugs. And when people are dying or having adverse reactions, enlarged hearts, respiratory infections, and things of this nature, embolisms, which are being recorded, they're downplaying this. They're not posting these adverse reactions to these drugs, because if they do, then people are going to go, well, hell, 220,000 people died after getting, otherwise healthy people died getting this inoculation. Why should I take it? It's not in the government's interest for you not to take it. Another reason, the government says, well, the vaccine's free. No, it's not free. The government is paying the pharmaceutical companies to give the vaccines, which means that the pharmaceutical companies have a vested financial interest in making sure everyone gets that damn vaccine because they're getting money for it. It's just like the weapons industry. I mean, war is good business for the weapons industry. If you don't have a war, then you're sitting there wondering, well, I guess I'll go play the slot machines at the casino. But if you have a war, you're making stuff to perpetuate the military momentum. If you're a pharmaceutical company and people aren't taking your drugs, then you just lost billions of dollars of research and development. So I think that it's partially financial. I know it's political. And I also believe it's all about socialist control. If you can control the population by any means necessary, and I think this is the last desperate measure of control is the vaccine mandate. That's the last way you can control people, is force them into a small area and confine them and make sure they get injected. And that shows the people two things. One, the government has total control over your life. And the second thing it shows them is that you have no say-so in the matter. And I think that's a parallel to the Third Reich. Isolate the Jews, isolate the Slavs, put them in ghettos, leave them to their own devices. Only in this case, we're willfully injecting people with something that many don't want to have against their will. And that was called a crime against humanity in 1945. Mengele did it not. Mengele did it in Auschwitz. He was injecting things into twins and doing experiments in genetics that today, a lot of his research, even though he was one of the most wanted Nazis after the war, a lot of his research fell into Allied hands, and Kary Mullis developed DNA. So you look at the stuff that was developed by the Nazi scientists that killed people and was a true horrific event, and compare that to what's happening today with an unverified, unproven drug. Because if it was proven and verified, it would have sanction and legitimacy. They lifted the legal sanctions off the pharmaceutical company so they can't be sued in case you do die. When a drug company has exemption from liability, be warned about the drug.
So the science that Mengele did, was it proper science, like proper reporting? I hate to talk about it in this sort of...
Yeah, he did. Actually, he did. He kept
a good job of it in a sense.
What he did,
terrible word, sorry about that if I offended anyone, but
he kept detailed records of everything he did. What he did and how he did it was horrific. Okay, I won't even go into the details because some people won't be able to withstand the visuals. But what he did to people, even without anesthesia, in order to expand his knowledge of human genetics, is astounding even by today's standards. Okay. It makes drawing and quartering look almost humane. And his notes became basically doctrine for a lot of the people wanting to pursue knowledge of the human genome, of the blood typing, breaking that down into the common DNA that we use today. Like you can do a DNA test. I did one just for laughs and gigs when my father was alive, and to see what we missed in the family tree. But it'll break down 20, 30 different countries that going back 5,000 years or so, that'll show you where all your ancestors came from because of the mitochondrial DNA. Well, Mengele was way ahead of the game on that because he wanted to break down human cells to find out, was there truly a Jewish blood? Was there an Aryan blood? He was doing these studies that sound insane. But then if you look at the DNA test people take, it's the great grandchild of that research.
So they had microscopes back then, but they didn't have gene sequencers. They didn't have maybe they had mass spectrometers.
No, they didn't have that either. No.
What did they have?
Well, basically, and this is not my area of expertise, but what they had was Mengele was able to separate cells using high-powered microscopes. He could separate cells and distinguish between ethnicities of people based upon certain results from those examinations. I'm not well versed enough in the medical field to be able to tell you what all that was. But I'll give you an example. He was able to apparently be able to tell from the blood drawn if someone was a Ukrainian or if someone was a Bulgarian.
That's crazy for that technology back then.
Okay. How he did that without using current mitochondrial DNA methods, I don't know. I have no idea. But he was a genius at that, but he was ruthless in his application of it. That's what got him in trouble. I mean, if people had walked into Auschwitz on their own and said, "Hey, do a blood test on me. I want to see, what you can find out." Then, oh, sure. But no, they brought them in, left, to the right, to the gas or to the work camp, or those of you who qualify, like twins and dwarves and other anomalies of the human experience, were brought into his laboratories, and they became lab rats. That's where he violated the laws of humanity and the laws of war.
Was he doing it out of a sadistic thing, or was it purely intellectual, just like psychotic intellectual?
No, he was strictly a pure scientist. He was not the kind, and I take this from the people I interviewed who knew him. I even interviewed his son, Rolf, and some of the SS men who knew him.
You met them or over the phone or?
No, I met him face to face. I met Rolf face to face. And so what Mengele was doing was pure science, ruthless science. There was no emotion and no compassion in his work. It was strictly the result by any means. Now, he would take certain children. This is strange about Mengele. He would take certain children, he would give them better food, candy, and put them in a nice place to stay. And he would do the experiments of blood tests and everything. And he would treat them very well. But after he was done with them and they were of no use, they went off to the gas chamber. So how you develop that mindset as a doctor, a medical doctor who takes the Hippocratic Oath to do no harm, could even think of doing something like that, let alone.
It's just like lab rats. I've worked in medical laboratories. I've worked on mice brains at a certain point in my life. I decided that wasn't my career of choice, but they say like, oh, this rat's having a good life, this chicken's having a good life, until it's time to have to go and be done research on them,
Yeah, well, that was Mengele's theory. They're going to die anyway. Let's let them give them a little bit nicer life until the procedures are over, and then off you go.
And his son was what was it like for his son once he realized what his father did, and when did he realize what his father did?
Rolf was a young child when the war ended, and his father escaped to South America, Argentina at first, and then later Paraguay. Then he died in Brazil. But and Rolf did manage to make a trip to South America to meet his father after many years. I think it was maybe 20 years later that he actually managed to, or 30 years, 70s. Yeah, 30 years after the war, he managed to go see his father face to face. And he knew about his father. I mean, the name Josef Mengele, I mean, even back before the days of the internet, was internationally known. I was talking with Simon Wiesenthal, who was really wanting to get his hands on him. And Simon said that, yeah, he knew about Rolf's travel and all this, that, and the other. But
who's Simon?
Simon Wiesenthal.
Who's that?
Well, Simon Wiesenthal was the most famous Nazi hunter in history.
Okay.
And he survived a couple of the camps. I believe Auschwitz was one, and I believe Belsen was the other, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, I worked with Simon on some research projects. He lived in Vienna, actually. I still remember his address. I think it was 13 Mozartstrasse. But he died a few years ago. His daughter now runs the organization, the Wiesenthal Center. But no, but the horrific nature of those crimes kind of rings true when you think about how it started. It all started in the 1930s with the T4 euthanasia program, where they would take the genetically inferior, the old, the feeble, the mentally ill, those with the extra chromosome issue, and they would put them in hospitals and inject them and kill them, and then send letters back to the families saying, "Oh, your child, son, daughter, father, mother died of pneumonia." And that way, they were diluting society of those they considered unworthy of life. And then after the war started, of course, until that became detrimental. Then, of course, they created the death camp operations with the gas chambers and the crematoria. Well, in the midst of all of that process, but the only thing that was not evolutionary was the medical experimentation, which had started in the mid 1930s. That was ongoing from day one until the end of the war. The only difference was that with the deportations and the trainloads of people coming into the death camps, that gave people like Mengele a lot more subject matter to work with.
So I'm just there's lots of threads here, but what was this? What was you want to take that? I can pause.
No.
So what was his son's reaction to meeting his dad?
Well, his son basically was horrified at what his father had been accused of doing, and he wanted to hear it from his father personally. And Rolf told me in the meeting that his father said, yes, there were things that we had to do. Those were our orders. And he was under orders from, General Raschke in particular, that they wanted to find out information about how to create a more pure Aryan race, meaning could they convert brown-eyed people to blue-eyed people by injecting dyes into their eyes?
Jeez, man.
Well, I mean, hey, this is, I know it sounds crazy, but you have to understand 50, 60, 70 years ago, people still believed in Darwinism with regard to the fact that there was a racial and intellectual difference between blacks, whites, Orientals. People base their prejudice upon what they believe to be a superior race. And until, of course, that was proven false by common sense above all other things. But they wanted to find out, can you change the genetic makeup of a human being to make them a more acceptable version that we would like to have in our society? And the only way to do that was to test their blood, test their marrow, test their teeth, whatever the hell it took, and do your experiments and see what you came up with. One thing about Mengele, though, I'll give him credit for one thing. He was an honest purveyor of knowledge. He didn't come to any predisposed suppositions. Everything was a hypothesis unless it was proven by science. And if he could prove something by science, then that was a victory. If it was a hypothesis that was unproven, then he wrote it out as such. So he was dedicated to finding truth. His method was extremely questionable.
Okay, cool. So, what is the differences between the Third Reich and what's happening today, would you say?
Okay, the difference between the Third Reich and what's happening today is that in most countries, Western Europe, Central Europe, the United States, Canada, we don't have a one-party government. That's the good thing. Okay, we have a one-party in power government, but there are other parties who challenge the accepted leadership in elections. When Hitler came to power, after the Enabling Act of 1934, he abolished all other forms of political parties. The only party in Nazi Germany was the National Socialist German Workers' Party. There were no other parties allowed, which meant dictatorial powers. He would never be challenged in an election. There would never be another election. That's one of the big differences. Another difference is the fact that the Third Reich targeted specific groups of people, Jews, Slavs, communists, for marginalization and then isolation and then later extermination. They targeted specific groups of people. These governments are targeting specific groups of people today, those who are unvaccinated and those who don't follow the political ideology of the current party in power. So they are considered domestic threats, which is a very easy way of targeting people by saying that you're not going along with the program. The big distinction between the Third Reich and what's going on, even with this COVID compliance nonsense, is the fact that the Nazis were target specific in their peoples that they were targeting. These countries like mine, they're targeting everybody. Everybody is a target in order to get this vaccination or to be, placed into a position of towing the political line and being a yes man nodding to the idiocy in Washington. And so we're not target specific on a broad stretch like Hitler was, but we are canvassing large sections of the population and targeting those that we feel are not going along with the program. And Australia, I mean, hell, look what they did. They just locked down an entire province.
Yeah, this is the period of time where I've never felt like the government's an actual threat to me, because we are vulnerable. We don't have weapons in the UK, in Europe. We're so dependent. And another difference that I'm seeing between, well, actually a worse difference for us is that if you look at the time frames, right, you had Hitler joining I think it was the German Workers' Party in 1929 or 23, right? Ages. So there was a period of like him getting fame after almost 6 or 7 years, but we have almost in sync world leaders after the virus comes out, basically doing lockdowns 4 or 5 months into I think it was May or June 2020. So the time frames are accelerated because we have the internet, we have just speed of communications, of research. And the one thing that probably disturbs me the most is that the homogeneity of the world leaders. We don't have one party system like Germany had, but we have a sense of one party homogeneity of common thought from world leaders on mandates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Europe especially. And when Donald Trump was president, he was not on board with that. Biden is very much on board with that. Just like Obama was on board with that, because they are globalists. They think that we should live under a common currency, a common government, or at least a common framework of government, which is a confusing concept anyway, because I would not expect a European to immediately adopt the American mindset. Hell, even in my country. I mean, you take somebody from Texas, you can't get them to agree on anything with someone from New York. They have total different mindsets. I mean, I'm in North Carolina. I'm a South Carolina native. I have virtually zero in common with anyone in New Jersey, other than the fact I love my country and I was willing to die for it. But most of those people up there, they're clowns. Okay. I mean, Delaware clowns. I mean, they voted for Joe Biden for 48 years, from senator to vice president to president. I mean, they voted for this idiot who's never had a successful foreign or domestic policy issue in his entire career. He's never had one success in 48 years. If you had a doctor with no success in 48 days, he'd lose his license. But what you're saying is that the European leadership seem to be coalescing under the umbrella of, okay, we need to contain societies and we need to build these things into something we can control, we can shape, we can educate, we can propagandize, that we can do our bidding. And that's the nature of human control. Every pack of wolves has an alpha male and an alpha female. Okay. It is not an egalitarian system of government in a wolf pack. You've got somebody who's in charge. Okay. So the guy in charge has his party, and the party makes mandates, they pass laws. And therefore, if you don't comply, you are in non-compliance with the government, and therefore you become a target. That's a big, here in America, man, we don't play that game. No. That's why we have a Second Amendment to our Constitution. Understand something. Europeans, you guys got screwed over years ago. With us, our Second Amendment was not created to give us the right to bear arms because we feared a foreign invasion. We didn't fear a foreign invasion. To hell with that. Our Second Amendment was to protect us, to protect our citizenry against totalitarian government. Okay? People don't realize that. The founding fathers said, no, you have a right to carry a gun in case the government gets crazy. And then you can, protect yourself against, government.
It's a legit thought. foresight.
Yeah, of course, because they were smart enough to realize that a citizenry that is disarmed is vulnerable to being basically controlled and overtaken by a dictatorship. That's the reason why our military is very unique. Our military is very apolitical. We are not allowed, if you're in the military and you're in uniform, you're not allowed to openly voice political opinions. You're not allowed to do that. We all hold them. We all hold our political thoughts in our head. We're human beings. But if you're in the military, you take the orders from the commander in chief, who's the president, whether he's right or wrong, Democrat, Republican, independent, or Martian. Okay, whoever is the commander in chief issues orders to the Secretary of Defense, and you follow your orders. Okay, that's the way it is. There is no second guessing the order. You follow your orders. That's why we have to be very careful in whom we select to run the country, because they also control the military. But we also have a fail-safe system of government, which most European countries don't have. We have a three-tier system of government. We have the executive branch, which is the presidency and the White House. Then we have the judiciary branch, which is the Supreme Court, which analyzes laws for constitutionality. Is it legal? Does it violate the Constitution? This, that, and the other. Then you have Congress. Okay, they're the legislative branch. They pass laws, and if those laws come into conflict with the Constitution, the Supreme Court adjudicates those laws and says, yes, this is in conflict with Article so and so, or no, it's not. It's okay. You can pass this as a law. So our system of government has several fail-safes that the current Democrats want to eliminate. They want to pack the Supreme Court and put more liberals on there, because to the liberal democratic mindset in my country, which is trying to pass these mandates, they see the bench and a judge not as an adjudicator of law, but as a purveyor of ideology. They prefer to have activist judges pass decisions based upon their political ideology, as opposed to sticking strictly to the Constitution of the United States and even the constitutions of their own individual states. So that's the big danger in our country right now with the liberal Democrats, is they want to control government by mandate, and they want to do it by fiat. They don't mind an executive order coming out if it suits their purposes, but let Donald Trump executive order seconding funds to secure the border wall to protect the country. Oh my God, that's impeachable. But the European countries are screwed. You guys are really in bad shape, because I think that stress upon a society makes it stronger. Like making steel. If you stress it, you heat it, you bend it, you pound it, you cool it, you heat it again, you pound it, you keep stressing that steel. It makes a stronger bond. But if you just take a piece of pig iron, heat it up, stick it in the water, it's brittle, it'll break. I think stress makes stronger societies, it makes stronger people. That's why I like talking about the Scots. They've had 1,000 years of stress. I mean, those noisy neighbors to the south were not very kind to them. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Scottish people are such an ingenious people, a resilient people, and innovative, creative people, and very entrepreneurial, because they realize that if you can't defeat your enemy, you can work with him to a certain degree, but then work around him to your own devices. And I think
Scotland now for me is completely different. They just love this SNP. They love being on furlough, sitting at home playing Xboxes. Not the kind of kids that I grew up with. The kids that I grew up with were pretty rough, but nowadays all the kids just sit at home, play their games, take their Kool-Aid.
Well, I remember Glasgow fairly well. I mean, I actually got into a couple of altercations when I was down in a place called the Clydeside, and I'm sure you're familiar with that area. And anyway, I had a couple of altercations where I guess they figured I was going to be an easy target to rob, because crime was pretty big in Glasgow back in those days. And but I think that a proper application of force and intellect can solve a lot of problems. Not to mention, high explosive, maybe a well-placed bullet. But as far as people, like in Scotland or any other European country, being cudgeled into a comfort zone to be dominated by a superior class. And I use that term superior in quotation marks. I don't mean superior by intellect. I don't mean superior by wealth. I mean superior by the manipulation of power. And if you can be subjugated by people who were at first elected, but then perpetually kept in power, or at least their surrogates get elected to replace them when they retire or when they fall ill or whatever. If you don't have a strong opposition force to your government, a legitimate legal opposition force, something that can voice dissent, voice opinion, and have honest debate. The day you kill honest debate in the political forum of a country, you just became a future dictatorship.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's the way history has proven it to be.
So, like, for what's quite obvious to me is that our current leaders do not learn from history. They think that they are able to wield these new powers and not be damaged, distorted by power. Power they've never had. Most politicians had pretty simple lives, not on the world stage. Scientists, academics, they weren't on the world stage saying things to the politicians to be quoted in newspapers saying this expert says this thing about lockdowns and things like that. But I just don't think that a lot of the leaders are learning from history, and that they're not aware of how they can be corrupted by the power, and they're trusting other world leaders as well to not be corrupted by the power as well. So I just, for me, it just doesn't make any sense. Crazy.
I think I can address your statement with this one. In my country, as a prime example, we have a group of people, these new Democrats, these new left-wing nut jobs, who think that socialism is a good idea. And I've done debates with them, and I always win, because I tell them, I say, well, if socialism as you envision it is such a great idea, why in the last century of socialist government has not one single example been a success? Why is socialism such an appealing concept to you? If you look around the world at every country that tried it, from National Socialism to communism, to any form of despotism, that where there's a one-party rule, because in order to have socialist government, you have to have one-party rule. So where do you find this appealing and successful? And no one can answer that question. They say, well, they just haven't applied socialism the right way. I'm like, well, let me ask you this question. How is depriving people of property, mandating their lives, determining what they get paid, determining what job they have, determining how much education they receive, determining where they go to school, and determining every facet of their life, which includes killing innovation? Because if you have a socialist society, you can't have free market capitalism in a socialist society. You can't have organized religion either, because it's incongruent. So how do you take away all those rights of the average human being and expect them to stand up and go, damn, I like this? Because I've never met a refugee from a socialist country living in my country that said, wow, I really miss the good old days back home.
Yeah.
I never have. So the most dangerous thing to a democracy, and people keep calling my country a democracy. We are not a democracy. A democracy, we are a representative republic, because we have 50 individual states under the federalist system that give states the rights to mandate their own laws as long as they fall in line with the U.S. Constitution. If you don't violate the Constitution, you can do any damn thing you want. We're not a pure democracy. Israel is a democracy. Okay. Great Britain has a parliamentary form of democracy, which is a very good system of government, by the way. It's just not always applied properly, as with ours now. But no, we are a republic, and the republic is impossible to take away unless you go to a pure democracy. A democracy is one election away from going out of existence. A republic takes generations to kill, because each state can have a bill requesting a convention of states. This happened back in 1860. We had a 4-year event called the American Civil War because several states decided to secede from the Union. Well, I think under our federal constitution, I believe if 35 states agree to a constitution of states, then they could vote to secede from the Union. And if they don't like the way things are going, states can say, "Oh, we don't want to be a part of you anymore." California, New York, New Jersey, you're harboring all these criminals, illegal aliens. You're raising taxes on everybody. They're wanting to come here. Well, no, we're not going to. And the federal government says that's a good idea. So, okay, we're going to secede from the union. It won't happen, but it's there. It could happen.
It could happen. Yeah,
it could happen.
It might happen.
And I tell you what, man, Biden is this clown. This guy has exceeded all expectations, man. I mean, watching him on television and watching some of his end results of his decisions is like watching a blind man juggle live hand grenades. I mean, it's not going to end well. Okay. It's like putting Stevie Wonder in Formula One racing. That will not end well. He's just not up to the task. And the people around him are yes men. The people around him are so intellectually bankrupt that they actually think, wow, that's a good idea. Either they believe that and they're genetically impaired, or they know it's crap, but they go along with it because their jobs depend upon being on the winning team. As we all know now, coming out, the winning team is proven to have been a fraud because of all the election fraud that's coming out in these various states. But no, our nation is very unique in the fact that we have, first of all, the United States was the first country in history to be a colonial power that broke away from a major colonial power. We were the first colonial holding to actually successfully break away from a major colonial power, Great Britain. Everyone else followed our example.
Okay. Well, what about ancient history up until now? I mean,
no. I'm talking about a colonial province that became an independent nation by defeating its overlord in a conflict. Okay, so no one else did that. No one else did.
The Romans and Greeks, when all those territories were flipping around.
No, the Romans and Greeks fell apart, but from the inside. The Romans deteriorated. They stopped policing their borders. They overextended. They did not control the immigration of the Goths, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the other Germanic tribes. They didn't control their borders. They were infiltrated and destroyed and decayed from within. It took about 4 or 5 centuries to happen, but in the last century, in the 5th century AD, it came to a climax.
It's crazy, 4 or 5 centuries versus now, where it can happen in.
Yeah, because because people can board planes, they can get on ships, they can walk across a southern border that's unsecured. But if you don't have borders, you don't have countries. And if you don't have security, then you do not have a population that believes in the efficacy of its own government. And if that happens, then you have started the internal decay. And that's what the liberals want. They want the internal decay. They want that groundswell of illegal immigrants coming in who they want to give citizenship, to vote Democrat, to make it a one-party state. And if they can do that, then they can control in perpetuity. What they don't understand is the fact that of the 300 and almost 30 million Americans living in this country, there are at least 20 to 25 million of us who are military veterans who are saying, no, we're not going along with that program. Okay. And there's a reason. Think about this last year. Remember, in 20 major American cities, the Black Lives Matter and Antifa were torching and burning and blowing things up and killing people. Okay, Portland, Seattle, Detroit. I mean, not Detroit. That police chief locked it down. He did the right thing. But all these major cities where you had this rampant damage, arson, looting, all this stuff going on, taking over sections, burning police stations, that only happened in liberal enclaves. That only happened in Democratic-controlled environments. And you know why they didn't try that stuff in Texas? They didn't try that stuff where I live in North Carolina. They didn't try it in Arizona. They didn't try it in places where large concentrations of people who have guns and know how to use them would be available to address that call. They didn't do it. They hit those areas where the mayors were compliant, the governors were weak, and they thought, oh, people are going to do it. Like Nancy Pelosi, people are going to do what they're going to do. Let them burn, loot, kill. Kamala Harris, our VP, started a fund to bail these criminals out of jail as soon as they got arrested for throwing, Molotov cocktails and torching police cars. So she created a bail fund to get them out of jail, to get them back on the street, because it fit her narrative. It fit the Democratic narrative to have these people blowing and burning things up. And so under so-called oppression resistance, which is a fallacy. But it didn't happen in the southern states. And there's a reason, because we Southern boys don't play that game, man. We don't do that. We'll kill you. We'll kill you quick. The only problem, I don't have enough land to dig enough holes to bury all the bodies I'd have to stack back there. But if you want to show up in a big crowd and threaten me, all right, well, I'm just putting you on notice, buddy, that, I've got a lot of rounds and I know how to use them. And, but that's why that only happened in very liberal enclaves, because they knew the liberal leadership in those cities would not allow federal forces in to basically restore order, because it would accelerate the knowledge that they were weak in their handling of their own social discontent.
I just don't understand this whole liberal pro-communist mindset. Okay, communism is good for the people at the top, But all these minions, what are they expecting to be life after their dictatorship, communist things installed?
Because the people who want communism are the very people who think they're going to be at the top.
But there's so many of them, they can't all be at the top.
Of course, but it's kind of like watching starving people scramble for the last sandwich on the buffet line. Everyone wants to be the last guy to get a bite of that sandwich. And whoever ends up with that sandwich is like in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, right? So if you're the apex predator at the top of that pile, you're sitting really well. And you have your minions around you, like Stalin, the Stavka, and you had the Kremlin, and all these people sitting around like Fidel Castro in his inner circle. The top communists, the hypocrisy of socialism and communism is the Marxist brand was equality for all. The communist mantra and the socialist mantra is equality for all except us. We earned it because we led the revolution. That's why when socialists and communists win if they win a revolution and take over a country, what's the first thing they do after they get rid of the intellectuals? They get rid of the revolutionaries who helped them get there, because the revolutionaries who helped them get there realized that they're now the new peasantry, and they're not going to elevate socially or economically. They're like, wait a minute, we fought for this, and we're still stuck here plowing with a mule? What? Okay, you got to get rid of the revolutionaries who put you in power, and then cultivate and propagandize and educate a new crop of revolutionaries who believe in the lie. And then as those people grow up and realize that there's another great lie that their forefathers just fought for, and they're like, well, wait a minute, we believe in this great revolutionary process as well, but we're not benefiting from it. That's when you have another purge. Socialist organisms have to purge themselves every generation, every few years, because if you don't selectively continue purging your own ranks, you cease to have a functionality, a reason to exist. Okay? Everyone's going to suffer. But what you want to do is make sure that the people who suffer the most are the people who are the most targeted, exploited, and propagandized enemies of the state. Stalin purged the Ukrainians 3 times. I mean, hell, the greatest famine in European history was because of Stalin. Okay? And the Ukrainians hated Stalin in large part. But he still maintained the power because he had the military, the NKVD, the GRU. He had all these people, Lavrentiy Beria was his enforcer. So the Ukrainians paid a price for being subjugated. This country, that won't happen. That won't happen. And the problem with the socialist mindset is that you said it before. You said they don't learn from history. I think they understand history quite well. I think they're arrogant enough to think that they can change the course of history.
So when you're talking about like Second Amendment, I want to ask this question for a few minutes. Basically, it relates to guns, but as technology advances, the gun is going to be less and less effective against the weapons of artificial intelligence, drones, metal soldiers, Atlas, Boston Dynamics. So in a sense, even having guns is not going to protect you from a always increasing technological power, unless you also get new weapons like, EMP things and stuff like that could disable these. I mean, it's not like a foolproof thing to have access to guns long term.
Well, that's true, but it's just like if you go back years, you didn't have airbags in automobiles. Okay, what you had was an engine block in front of your car and a seatbelt, and a seatbelt might save your life. But then again, cars got heavier and bigger, and then they got lighter and faster. So then they put airbags in cars to increase survivability of a crash. Same thing with weaponry. Weapons are always an evolutionary process. All technology is evolutionary. Technology never stops being developed. If there were robotic soldiers, maybe you have to have EMP technology to fry their circuits. Or maybe you just need a garden hose to wet them down like the Wicked Witch of the East, or whatever. But either way, technology is always countering other technology. There's an old saying that military secrets, such as weaponry, the technology advances are always fleeting because your enemy is always, perfecting their own methods of weaponry and their own technologies. So if I have a choice of sitting here with no weaponry to protect me against an assault by a bunch of thugs and hoping that maybe that somebody will come to my rescue, because I don't have protection, then I'm either an idiot or I have a death wish, because I don't expect a human wave attack on my property, but I'm prepared in case there is. As far as the future of artificial intelligence, I'm a firm believer that we can create our own destruction if we're not careful. I believe that. I mean, because we've seen the advances in microchip technology in the past 20, 30 years. We've seen, hell, 50 years ago, you didn't even have a transistor. Okay. Now look at what you got. Technology is always evolving. It's always moving at a fast pace, light speed, actually. I mean, if you buy a computer today, in 3 years, it's obsolete. Okay. Mm-hmm. So everything moves forward, everything. And I'm not worried about artificial intelligence, because I figure, well, I mean, after I survived the Army, the Marines, malaria, 3 ex-wives, I figure I have a pretty good idea that I'm going to survive almost anything. And if I have to, I'll just convert the AI to my line of thinking and make them my allies.
I mean, it's just being a software developer for myself, 12 years. It's and I see a lot of what AI can do, and people that use AI. It's just like, and quantum computing is coming along as well. I'm just like not so confident that we can control this and control the powers of dictators who have access to this technology, for humankind. Even though I hate to think about it that way, and I don't want to depress my listeners, but I mean, look at Elon Musk. He's just like coming up with new robots that are going to have fingers, and just like, why does he need to do that? He should be happy just going to Mars. But what is driving this continual progress towards technology? And look at, and also another thing that scares me as well is the word UBI, universal basic income. As soon as you basically make half the population unemployed, that population is dependent on the government sending the money. And what for food? So what happens if the government decides, hey, I don't want to pay universal income anymore? You don't have any means to provide for yourself. So I think people should be really scared of the words universal basic income, and not just allow. Maybe there should be laws against automation. I'm also kind of a communist thought, stopping technology and advancing, but in a sense, we have to stop some technologies from advancing. Otherwise, more and more jobs are going to be lost, and more power is going to be given away to the government.
Yeah, the one of the things I keep hearing about are the technology companies wanting to expand and automate more of industry to make it more efficient, to create more, faster, better, and which costs people jobs. If you've got one machine that can put 4 cars together in a day, as opposed to 12 guys putting 4 cars together in a day, in the long run, you save money because the machine doesn't go on strike. It doesn't demand a pay raise. It doesn't need health insurance. So, I understand your point there. And the argument supporting that from the left and some from the right is that, well, people who are losing their jobs due to the automation of industry can be retrained in other areas. Maybe they can be trained to build the automated technology and increase it. Maybe they can go into coding, or they can go into, I don't know.
The thing is, it's like a pyramid. If you're very, very good at coding, you can basically create something that will do the job of many people. So, for example, I created a social network, me only by myself. And that social network could link up people together for, mentoring and mentoring. It also has like the whole registration process, signing up, onboarding. It has charting for relationships. Even though hardly anybody uses it, it's fine. But I mean, I myself made that thing. So like, there's sort of like, you can imagine a bunch of elites at the top, and all these people that think they're going to get jobs and retrained. It just doesn't work that way in terms of technology. Well,
you're right. It doesn't work that way, because first of all, I mean, it takes years to train someone in a skilled trade. You know that.
Yeah.
Okay. I give you an example. You don't take somebody off the street and make them sign a piece of paper, and then the next day, oh, you are now a U.S. Marine. No, it takes months of training to be a basic Marine and years of experience to be a good one. It's just like being a carpenter. You don't give a guy a hammer, a saw, and a power sander and go build a house. It takes training. It takes time. Automation removes that time constraint. It gives you the actual ability to build a machine that can do things without having to be retrained or even reprogrammed in many cases. And I think that that's a good thing in a way, but I think it's a bad thing in a way, because once you remove the human condition from the creation factor, then you've lost part of what it means to be part of a society that builds something. Mm-hmm. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. I mean, see, like some of these assembly lines where they have all these machines for assembling cars together, there was maybe 100 machines they had, and all you need people to maintain these machines. But now they have new production facilities for cars that basically reduce that by about 10 times, because they can, you don't have to weld all these car parts together. You can, the sort of process is to just save so much time from that. So you're getting automation of automation in a sense. Well, you're improving the automation, so you need less people to maintain the machines. And we haven't even seen the effects of quantum computing yet, and that is basically goes off from Moore's law. But we could,
well, there's one great benefit that I do see to automation, and that benefit is saving lives. If you can use automation to save human lives, that's a good thing. I'll give you an example. If you can use the robots to find IEDs, mines, explosives, which they use now in limited capacities. If you could have automated animatronic, animals, robotic animals, basically, like the dogs and things like that. If you can have that technology take the risk factor out of doing dangerous work, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. But the minute you put a machine in charge of making a decision that has to be not just analytically precise, but every decision we make as a human being is also based upon some component of emotion. You have to have some level of empathy in your decision making when it comes to every decision you make, whether you're a CEO of a company or a general commanding armies. You have to have a certain level of understanding, compassion, and empathy. Machines don't have that. Okay, unless you can program that empathy factor and that compassion factor into the analytics. I don't know how you can do it. That's not my field, but I don't see how taking out the human component is always a good thing.
I'm not aware of any technology that has artificial intelligence that has compassion built into it. I'm not an expert in it like Lex Freeman is, or even people within my own communities. But I don't know how you make a mathematical proof to make the outcome decisions of an artificial intelligence moral. Just don't see it. I don't see. And if you could, how do you know that the system is not pretending to be moral until at such point it doesn't need to pretend anymore?
Right. The same thing with people. You don't know if that guy's really a moral guy. You hear what he says, you see what he does, and you wait for him to screw up. And if he screws up, you say, "Oh, hypocrite." But machines versus man. Well, I'll put it this way. If I had a choice of putting my life in the hands of a machine or a well-trained, intelligent human being, I'm going to go with the person, because generally that person has the experience that places them in the leadership position. The machine is simply a programmed piece of machinery that does an analytical decision making based upon a binary, composition. I would much prefer to have decisions being made by human beings with experience as opposed to a machine with a program. Because first of all, machines don't have accountability. Human beings do. In most cases, not in this administration of my country, but yeah, I much prefer the human factor.
Let's try and talk, if we can, about solutions and solving problems. But before we get to that point, I just want to touch on what you've noticed within like celebrity culture, in terms of, we see these celebrities that are very well off, but they're sort of supporting this whole woke culture, possibly communism. But why do they want to support a system that could potentially rob them of their own comforts?
Well, that's a real simple question to answer, because first of all, the extremely wealthy believe that they are insulated from bad political decisions. They're insulated from high taxes. They're insulated from the cost of living. They don't buy their own gasoline. They have their private jets. They don't have to worry about commercial air travel. So they feel insulated and protected because they know that the other wealthy people in politics are going to protect them for their support. Or at least they have that belief, which is a fleeting belief, in my opinion.
Have they ever studied the French Revolution?
I don't think they read much on Robespierre, and I don't think they're well versed on on the French Revolution. I don't think they understand what the Directory was all about. I don't think they have a firm grasp of history in general. I think they live in a world that is so false and so make-believe that they think that they can bend it to their will and make a utopia, turn it into a Miltonian utopia, so to speak, that gives them this illusion of grandiosity and seclusion. There's a reason why. Understand something about the hypocrisy of the elites. They don't mind illegal immigration into my country. They don't mind sticking these people in all these other places demographically to try to alter the course of politics. But why is it that you never see the wealthy people in Beverly Hills, Bel Air, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, the Hamptons? You never see these people living in these very lavish, walled, secure areas, allowing the immigrants into their property.
Great point, man.
But they don't mind dumping them in my backyard. Okay? So if you're going to
see
be
them at the border feeding people and whatever, you know.
Now, I will say this about some of the very woke celebrities that I disagree with them politically, but I admire the fact that they're not hypocrites. And I'll name them for you. George Clooney. I don't agree with him politically about hardly anything, but I respect the man immensely because he did put his money and his ass where his mouth was. He went to Darfur. He went to South Sudan. He has done a lot to help people far beyond what he ever had to do with regard to being a celebrity. He's not alone. Angelina Jolie has done a lot for people. Some of these celebrities, yeah, they have a liberal bent to them, which I can't quite fathom being a historian, but at least they're honest. Sean Penn. Sean Penn is probably the greatest left-wing liberal that I disagree with on every single position that he takes. But he's gone to Haiti several times. He's gathered accumulated wealth to convert that into medical supplies, food, potable water. I mean, Sean Penn, he's a believer in what he believes in, which I disagree with, but I totally respect the man for what he believes in because he actually practices what he preaches. He does the work. He does the hard work that the other hypocrites would never dream of. They're not going to walk out of their mansions and leave their swimming pools and put on some old clothes and fly to 103-degree heat with mosquitoes to help earthquake victims and feed the starving. They're not going to do that. Sean Penn, George Clooney, those people have done this. Okay. So these are guys I respect. I disagree with them totally, but I can disagree with you and still respect you for the effort you put forth into practicing what you preach. So I respect those guys. Okay. I do immensely. And then there are others who are just absolute hypocrites. I look at my leadership, Nancy Pelosi, that vapid wombat. She's absolutely so out of the loop on life that is stunning to me that she's even still the Speaker of the House. Joe Biden. Okay. I met him years ago when he was still a semi-lucid senator and he seemed pretty good to go, but he's a fraud. He and his son Hunter are organized crime syndicate leaders. They know it. And all these other people, the Clintons, the Clinton Foundation was a big money laundering scheme in the first place. That's all it was. It was a mechanism to collect wealth, churn it out, dole it out where appropriate, to benefit their political causes. But they didn't really do a hell of a lot to help people in need, as they claim. I have more respect for the guy driving a taxi, earning an honest living, than I do a wealthy politician who started out making $140,000 a year as an elected official, and now he's worth about $40 million. How the hell did he get that damn money? He wasn't moonlighting delivering pizza. Okay. So obviously there's a lot of criminal activity. There's a lot of financial stimulus that goes into politics, which I find disgusting. My son's running for Congress, by the way.
He's running the show.
I'll put him on your show. Max is running for Congress against a Republican incumbent. He's going to primary David Rouser. That will go next March, I believe, is when the primary election happens. So the November is the general election. But Max served 2 tours of Afghanistan as a Marine, PTSD. He had some physical injuries. He started going to school, working as a security guard, and then moved to North Carolina to be with us and the family. And he started his own business. I worked with him. We started the business, repairing homes, restoring homes. We did beautiful work. I have pictures. and I could give them to you. And we brought a lot of talent and skill to that. And then he got hired by a large home building company. He was doing government contracts and doing estimates for multi-million-dollar contracts, doing the estimates for those. And he's seen how the country has gone down so fast. You could hear the sonic boom of how fast the Biden administration has destroyed this country. And it's not over yet. So he and a bunch of other military veterans, the SEAL Foundation guys, all of these guys are rising up. All the veterans are rising up to primary weak Republicans and take out Democrats holding these offices in the House of Representatives and even the Senate. So it's going to be a human wave attack with regard to the midterm election next year. And the Biden administration is doing all the heavy work. They're making all the right decisions to help their opposition take back power. And that's a beautiful thing.
We need change in America. I mean, I don't have much military experience. I was in the Air Cadets for a few years. I did shot some rifles, flew some planes, but never anything like what you guys do. But I can imagine being a veteran in America right now, or even in the UK. I have no veterans in Afghanistan, and just looking at what they've sacrificed for their country, and just like they are now suffering more because of the anger of what's happened recently in the last 2 weeks. And they're the one that's suffering because they have to internalize that. And where's the outlet for that? Like are their family's going to suffer for it or what? It's just extra pain for them and they can't do anything about it. But what? Yeah,
well, I'll give you a good analogy from my experience as a home builder, academic, soldier, Marine, whatever. Imagine if you and a bunch of guys took 6 to 9 months of life and you built a house. You built a beautiful house. The only thing you had left to do was paint the walls. Then all of a sudden, somebody burns it down. You just lost all of your investment. You lost all of your time and effort for nothing. That's the way the veterans feel about Afghanistan. Almost 20 years come November of active on-the-ground combat. And all of a sudden, in one fell swoop, this administration, and they try to blame Trump. Well, no, they can't do that because Trump had a conditional withdrawal. There were conditions placed upon the U.S. withdrawal. There was a stage component to withdrawing. Anyone in the military who has any logistical G2, what we call intelligence, tells you that when you withdraw forces or when you withdraw from an active area, you do it in stages. You withdraw friendly non-combatants, nationals. Then you withdraw allied non-combatants. Then you withdraw those who supported you because they're at risk. Then after you withdraw all those people, then you shrink your perimeter, you fortify your departure zone, and then you leave from that location, and then you can say, hasta luego, homeboy, we're out of here.
You don't have to be a military guy to figure that out. I mean, it's logic, like common logic.
Well, logic and liberalism do not go hand in hand in most cases. So that's why you have so many people frustrated. Even Democrats are jumping ship. I mean, they see what's coming around the corner. I'm going to make a prediction. I'll make a prediction. And this time next year, you can hold me to it. I'll say that 10% of the Democrats in power right now will switch parties and become Republicans or independents because of what's going on in the Biden administration, or at least 10 to 20% will jump ship before 2024. If they want to get reelected, their constituents are not going to be happy that they got their guy's a Democrat and he's being supported by a Democratic organization that just screwed the world. Okay. I mean, let's not even look at the border issue on my country. That's the most sensitive thing. Afghanistan's a tragedy. The southern border is a catastrophe. Okay. And the Democrats did that. They stopped the Trump border wall construction and they stopped the stay in Mexico policy and let all this, I'm just going to say it, human garbage flow across the border like an open sewer line because you have no idea who these people are. Hell, the airlift that came in from Afghanistan, one of the guys on the plane that they say we vetted these people, bullshit. One of the guys on the plane was a convicted pedophile that Trump had deported, that they brought back. So you're bringing back criminals and possibly terrorists into this country at the expense of American citizens, journalists, and students still trapped in Afghanistan.
And you've basically supplied the next generation of terrorists that could be the guns. The guns in Afghanistan are not just want to stay in Afghanistan. The guns could end up in the streets of London, and they're not just AK-47s, which have a really bad accuracy. You've got guns that are rifled, very high precision, much more accurate than AK-47s. One guy in a roof, one of those could kill hundreds of people. And now basically, I'm not too worried about the airplanes and Humvees, because unless they can hide them in caves, they're pretty easy targets for health, like, drones and that. These big things I don't think are the biggest threat. It's these small arms, the sniper rifles, grenade launch. I mean, grenade launchers. These are just ridiculously small things that can cause a lot of. It's unbelievably bad what they have. The night vision goggles.
Well, the problem with the Biden administration was that not only did they fail to extract all the military hardware, which would be the second to last thing you do, they didn't get out the hardware, but they claimed they disabled everything so it can't be used. Well, we just saw photographs of a Black Hawk flying with a guy hanging under it. And apparently the reports I heard was that the Taliban had an Afghan pilot trained to fly the Black Hawks, holding him at gunpoint to fly it so they could hang somebody upside down as a demonstration of power. And I guess they dropped him. It doesn't matter whether you disable it or not, because the Chinese and the Russians are going to buy that stuff, give them hard cash, reverse engineer the software, and they're going to be able to understand everything they need to know about some of this equipment. The stupidity of it was not just the stupidity, but the acceleration of stupidity is what stunned people in my country, to where right now, I mean, you even have Democrats talking about, well, we need investigations and we need to have the Joint Chiefs of Staff resign. Almost 90 flag officers have already signed a petition that everybody from the Secretary of Defense on down to the Joint Chiefs needs to resign due to incompetence or due to collusion with an incompetent, including my boss, my former regimental commander, who is a Medal of Honor recipient, that I wrote his book with him. But the problem is that Europe will be the first to feel this. The Europeans are going to be the first to feel this bad decision. Why? Geography. Because it's easier to go from Afghanistan to Eastern Europe and Western Europe than it is to get to the U.S., at least after Biden's gone. Because he doesn't care about borders. But you're going to find that a lot of that weaponry, and you're right, you're going to find a lot of that weaponry filtering into Western Europe into the hands of what we call shadow cells. You're going to have isolated pockets of jihadists waiting for the right moment for someone to send that code signal or to send that Facebook message. Now's the time. In the name of Allah, strike. Just like in Paris, like in London, the subway, like in Spain. They're going to rise up and they're going to have the weapons to do it.
And the thing is, if you give night vision and an M14, whatever is accurate rifle, they can shoot people and they can hide away. They don't. The small amount of numbers they are, it's a force multiplier. So this is not just terrorism against the people of Afghanistan; it's a terrorism against people of Europe. Because, I mean, also if you ever want to go back into Afghanistan, America was always force multiplied above the enemies to keep it tabs on them. But every piece of our territory is going to be in one of those caves, and it's going to be absolutely terribly more difficult to control that areas again,
Yeah, and what Biden screwed himself up on, because Biden did not get everyone out of Afghanistan, he lost a very valuable chance to make one final blow to make this almost seem logical. Right now, if I were a military commander, if I were the commander in chief, and I had everybody safe out of Afghanistan, I would launch the largest airstrike since the raids on Berlin. And I would hit Bagram and I would hit Kabul airports and destroy every piece of hardware we have sitting on the tarmac. I would hit every single known village harboring the terrorists. I would hit training camps. I would round the clock bomb that entire country with target specificity until I knew that the only thing crawling around there were the rodents feeding on the corpses of the jihadists. I would destroy all the hardware, make sure it was totally nothing more than scrap metal. But you can't do that now because we have people who are now going to become hostages. And I think those people, if they're not killed, because it's not people have this misunderstanding. They think it's a cohesive Taliban that has control of Kabul and the country. No, you've got a dozen factions of different idiots. You've got people with first and second grade educations who can barely read their own language. Walking around with modern weaponry, living in a 6th century mindset, who think that they can't even read the Quran, but they'll listen to a mullah tell them what they have to do. So they're going to walk around and kill people, behead people, this, that, and the other. Then you might have the more intelligent specimens of these terrorist groups say, no, we can't kill these people. We're going to hold them for ransom. We're going to get some concessions out of the U.S. government and the Europeans. Hold them for ransom, a few $1 billion here and there. They gave $150 billion to Iran and got nothing for it. What will they give us for these people? So that's what they're thinking. They're not completely stupid. They may not be well educated, but they're not stupid people. Not by any means. They know what they want. They know how to get it. And unfortunately, we have a sock puppet of a president right now who actually just handed everything over without even a blink. I mean, he didn't.
And how are politicians stuck with this now? They're going to the president's going to get the blame. If Trump comes back in, people expect him to fix an impossibly difficult situation now. I mean, you basically.
Well, this is not something that's going to be fixed. This is something that can at best be contained, and you can contain it. But containment is often more expensive in blood and treasure than direct action, because it takes a lot of time to plan, operate, and accelerate military operations, even on a small scale. And you have to be very careful how you do it. People don't understand this. You don't just get into Afghanistan. You have to get permission to cross airspace of various countries. If they don't give you permission to cross their airspace, you don't get into Afghanistan. Okay? If Pakistan, Iran, well, right off Iran, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Russia, if these countries don't give you overflight permissions, then you're not getting anywhere near Afghanistan. You could do it, but you'll spark another war, at least a big UN outcry. Like, who cares about the UN anymore anyway? But no, whether Trump comes back as president or not, there will be a Republican president. There's no doubt in my military mind. And I firmly believe that after the midterm elections next year, if Biden is not 25th Amendment out due to incompetence, then he will be impeached for various crimes against the country, of which there are legitimate charges that can be filed. Unlike the 4 years of Trump impeachments, which went nowhere because there was no evidence and there was no crime. And $40-50 million spent on these silly investigations that went nowhere because there was no meat on the bone. But as far as Biden, he's done all the work and it's all out there for exposure. So he'll be impeached. He'll be gone. Then you have Kamala Harris, who would take over the country, and she's probably even worse. I mean, you probably get a more intelligent reaction out of a parking meter dropping a coin in the slot than you do asking her a question. She's such a vapid moron. And a criminal. She's a criminal. And most people don't realize this. So let me educate your listeners about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris, when she was district attorney in San Francisco, ran for election. Later on, she became attorney general of California. And she did it by being the mistress of the mayor of San Francisco, Slick Willie. He helped her politically and financially. So when she was running for election, she made a deal with the Catholic Diocese of St. Ignatius. And St. Ignatius had 40 plus priests who were being indicted for child molestation charges, on varying degrees of child molestation, from forcible rape right on down to just molestation, whatever. So she made a deal. And she said, well, I tell you what, if you support me financially and support me publicly for my election, then I'll make those charges go away. Guess what happened?
They went away.
Not only did they go away, the files were destroyed. And the victims were never even notified that she was going to dismiss the charges against their perpetrators.
Okay. Just underworld, horrible.
That's a reality check. People are going to go, oh, where do you get your information? Well, why don't you do some investigation yourself? Because one of the lawyers in California, in San Francisco, actually filed a lawsuit for disclosure of that information, and she did the investigation. And she found out that I think it was 44 of the priests over a period of decades had been charged, and they were sitting there waiting to be prosecuted. And she just wiped them away. She said, no, I don't see a problem with this. Understand something about Kamala Harris, too. She was running for president in the primary for the Democratic Party. If you remember this, when they had the debates, Kamala Harris is running. Do you realize that she got less than 3% of the vote from her own state of California? They don't even believe her bullshit. They didn't even support her because they knew she was corrupt. Less than 3% of her own population supported her running for president. 3%. That's unfathomable.
It's worse than the Nazis' first attempt.
But dig this. Then Biden chooses the biggest loser of the group to be his vice president, all because she's a woman of color. Well, I thought white was a color. Maybe I'm wrong. He chooses her because she fits a certain demographic. That's all the liberals care about. They care about demographics, optics, and they care about satisfying the woke left Marxist sitting over here pulling the strings. Well, the Green New Deal. What a fraud. People understand something about the Green New Deal. I love this shit. Listen to this. They want to take out petroleum-based products. They killed the Keystone Pipeline. They gave Putin his oil pipeline, but they killed ours, okay? So they kill our pipeline. They want to kill petroleum. They want to stop all carbon emissions. Okay, that's fine. Well, let me tell you what your world's going to be like 2 years after you do that. Get rid of your cell phone. Get rid of your car. You can't even have electric cars. Why? Because even if you have plastic or fiberglass bodies around those batteries, where do you think plastic comes from? Petroleum, you dolt. You genetically inbred, cell-deficient individual. You think that because you kill petroleum, you're going to live a better life? Okay, try again. You won't have tires. You won't have tires. You won't have refrigerators, okay, because you won't have anything made of steel, because without coal or natural gas, you can't turn iron into steel. So you might as well live in a wooden shack, get a mule, get a wooden plow, and go back to the 17th century agrarian society method of lifestyle, because that's what you want, because you obviously don't understand technology and the history of technology.
Why do you think it is that like so much of this big tech people, they get this flavor of success and they go up high, and then they become this woke BLM placards on their websites and all that? Why is it?
Because they have no character. They have no character, they have no focus, and they have no sense of responsibility to mankind in general. They think they're being benevolent. They think they're being sanctified. They think they're the anointed acolytes of superior wisdom by trying to take away your rights and impose this, impose that, take away this, take away that. What they've done as they were elected is expose the deterioration of character that is prevalent among most politicians. Most politicians run for office because of ego. It's like people want to be movie stars or rock stars. Yeah, they want to make music, they want to do films, but it's ego. But a healthy ego is a good thing. Sigmund Freud, okay, when he defined ego and the id, okay, he came out, yeah, a healthy ego is a good thing. Then you have the super ego. But at some point in time, you've got to put common sense into the equation. I have an ego, sure. Do I think I write pretty good books? Yeah, I think I write pretty good books. But does my ego tell me that I'm the greatest historian ever? No, because I've known some. Sir John Keegan, for one. I don't think I'm the best at what I do. I try to be the best that I can be. Politicians like these don't even have a fallback position. They know they're
you're quite good if Steven Spielberg's you're working with him on movies, so.
Well, that's true, because I'm a specialist. I mean, I'll put it this way. I'm good at what I do. So if you're making a film about World War II or any military film dealing with weapons, uniforms, machinery, whatever, okay, I'm your guy.
And tank battles.
Battles, yeah. I mean, if you want to do the Vespasian's failure or his successes, if you want to do the Siege of Masada with the 10th Legion or whatever, I mean, I'm your guy. But if you want to have your appendix removed, I'm not your guy. I know my limitations and I work within those. That's why when people come to me and say, hey, we're doing a film about this, I'll give you an example, Rob Roy, okay? Rob Roy McGregor. We're doing this film. I'm like, okay, I'm not a specialist on 17th century Scotland to that extent, but there are other people who are. Let me put you in touch with the right people. To have an ego means, to have a good, healthy ego means you're pretty comfortable in your own zone. You know what you can do, and you can do it confidently. I know I can still, even at age 59, take a rifle, zero my scope, and it probably hit a running man at 800 yards. I can do that. But I'm not the guy you want if you need me to reprogram your computer in your BMW. Okay? So we all have limitations. We all have strengths. But the people in power who think that they are the apex, they try to be the apex predator. Don't want to come across that way, but that's what they think they are. The people in power who don't understand their own limitations are the most dangerous types of people you can have.
Yeah, you don't want people that making decisions at all.
No, you don't, because they don't. First of all, they claim to be sympathetic or empathetic to the plight of people. If you were sympathetic or empathetic to the plight of people, you wouldn't have left people in Afghanistan, you idiot. And you sure as hell wouldn't have opened up the southern border to allow drugs, drug cartels, illegal weapons, human trafficking, rapists, pedophiles, and all sorts of other human garbage to come into the country, all because you want to bolster a political base by making illegal people to vote for you. Okay, you just condemned an entire country and subjugated an entire population to the whims of a criminal element that you don't even know how many are in the country. You just screwed the country. That's treason. That's Alien and Sedition Act 101. You just violated the rights of the average American citizen to be free and safe from foreign invasion. You welcome the foreign invasion.
And this thing in Afghanistan, it will last 100 years in the memory of other nations.
Dude, they're still living with the after effect of Alexander the Great stomping through the country. Okay. The British Empire, they pulled the hell out. I mean, the Khyber Pass was not a good day for them. So you got to understand something. Afghanistan, so there's a reason why there's no Club Med in Afghanistan. Okay. You don't see people building casinos and building 5-star hotel resorts in Afghanistan, just like Somalia, places like that. There are certain places in the world that are not worth your time and effort. They're not worth it because you're not going to change the mindset of the people. People have to want to change. And people who do not want to change will often fight to the death to keep their lifestyle the way it's been for centuries. And I say, let them stay that way. I don't care if a guy wants to make love to a goat, or if a guy wants to if he wants to go marry a 9-year-old girl, I feel sorry for the 9-year-old girl, but guess what? It's not my job to go and adjudicate marriage certificates in Afghanistan. Okay? That's not my strong point. You got to know when not to go. Okay? I'll give you an example. The British in 1982, the Falklands. People were saying, well, why would they take soldiers on ships 8,000 miles to fight for a string of little islands off the coast of Argentina? Well, I'll tell you why, because they were British damn citizens. Okay. And they wanted help. And the Argentines said, well, I don't know. We think we're going to take these Malvinas islands that you call Falklands. We're going to take these islands back and we're going to subjugate these people under Argentine law, which was a socialist country at the time. And Margaret Thatcher said, well, I think that's a bad idea and I'm going to kick your ass. So she sent the British forces in there and they did just that. Okay. They had some casualties. They had some losses, but they upheld the doctrine of free people, meaning that if you are a free person belonging to a sovereign free state, that you will be protected by that sovereign free state. Margaret Thatcher, she might have had her flaws, but when it came down to nuts and bolts, she got the job done. Okay.
And it's also the principle, you're fighting for the principle there, which is also important. It's carries on past the war.
Well, yeah, of course, but people were going to condemn Margaret Thatcher for sending troops 8,000 miles to free the Falklands. My country sent people over 25,000 miles around the world in World War II to free continents. So if you're going to free people, I say do it, but do it right. Do it and do it right. And Margaret Thatcher did it right. Okay. And I respect her. And I respect her hard. And unlike some of the other prime ministers you've had, I mean, let's not talk about Neville Chamberlain, peace in our time. But Margaret Thatcher was one of the world's foremost military and political leaders. Not military in the sense that she commanded troops at the front, but she was willing to take that political risk. And if you don't, in politics is like the military. Sometimes you have to take a calculated risk. You have to. I'm not talking about trying to run that traffic light to see if you can make the intersection. That's stupidity. But sometimes you have to take a calculated risk and balance out and weigh the negative and the positive end results of an action. And she weighed it out and thought that it was a positive response to a bad situation. And I feel that if you're going to lead a country politically, which means you lead it militarily, then you need to have 3 things in your corner. 1, the humility to know that you don't know everything and ask people that you trust the right questions. The second thing you have to have is the intelligence to know you're getting the right answers. And the third thing you have to have is the planning methodology, and know that if you get into an environment, if you get into a conflict, you damn well better have an exit strategy. Nobody in their right mind walks into a supermarket without knowing in their head what they want to walk out with, right?
Most of the time, yeah. Sometimes I just walk in anyway.
Well, I'm saying that if you're going shopping, you have a list, you know what you're going to buy. Very few people just walk through a supermarket because they're bored and go, oh, I think I'll take a whole shopping cart load of this stuff and take it home because, they had the free time. No, you go into a situation with a plan to get in, a plan to function, and a plan to get out. You do not go into any conflict. You don't even go into a business arrangement without you don't even sign the paperwork unless you see what the end clause is. Okay. You don't do a medical procedure without reading the paperwork and knowing what the results could be, the detriments of that procedure, what the liabilities are, who's not liable for this, that, free consent. Okay. You put an intellectual process into the contractual obligation of any decision you make in the legal world, medical world. You have to apply that same logic to the military and politics. You have to have the knowledge to know that when you make that decision, people are going to die. People are going to get maimed. Okay. People are going to be hurt. And if you can make that decision in good conscience, then that makes you a strong leader. But if you make that decision without any contingency planning or any exit strategy, then you're an idiot. Okay. That's just the way I see it.
This is heavy stuff, man. Heavy stuff.
And anybody who sees this podcast should know that I'm a firm believer that we should have gone to Afghanistan. But once we killed bin Laden, we should have gotten the hell out. Maybe left a small contingency force to monitor the terrorist movements and, if necessary, drone strike them on occasion. But no surge. I mean, after bin Laden was killed, that was the primary target of opportunity. He was he was on the world's most wanted list. We got him. Once we got bin Laden, we could have gotten out and left a contingency force in Pakistan, if they let us, and also in Afghanistan to monitor that with the UN or NATO controlled operation. No problem. But no.
At what point did America adopt Afghanistan? Like go in there and it's like the part of the country, and
well, after 9/11, of course, we knew that. Well, first of all, let me backtrack on this. If Bill Clinton had done his job as president, there wouldn't have been a 9/11, because Osama bin Laden had been expelled from Saudi Arabia. They kicked him out because they knew he was a bad guy. They didn't like him. And they said, no, you got to go. He was living in Sudan. The Sudanese government contacted the American embassy, Washington, through the American embassy in Khartoum. And they said, hey, we know this guy's wanted for what he's done to the USS Cole bombing planning and the Khobar Towers planning in Saudi Arabia and all this. We got him. So if you want to come get him, go for it. Bill Clinton had two opportunities to get Osama bin Laden in the late 90s, and he failed to do so. And when he failed to do so, that meant that bin Laden had to leave Sudan because he knew he was compromised. So then he goes to Afghanistan. He goes to Afghanistan. The Taliban welcome him as a brother jihadist and say, yeah, you can set up the Al-Qaeda stuff here and you can plan your stuff. Don't worry about it. They'll never come here to get you. Well, then 9/11 happened. And of course, in November, 2 months after that, we did have troops on the ground in Afghanistan. They've been there ever since until a few days ago. So our reach is long, and our memories are long, but the planning was not the best. And Afghanistan was an afterthought in the American conscience after the Soviets pulled out, after 10 years of occupation. Afghanistan meant nothing to us, really. But 9/11 changed that. And after that, our nation made the mistake of going on this concept of nation building. All of a sudden, we're looking at Afghanistan like Germany and Japan after World War II. Oh, we're going to have a big Marshall Plan, and we're going to build this place into a palace of democracy, and these people are going to just flock to us. They're going to go, oh, thank you for giving women the right to vote. No. Okay, yeah, a lot of people did benefit in the last 20 years. But unless you're willing to stay there and perpetuate that with a ground force that can enforce those laws and give those sanctuary situations and conditions, then all you've done is buy people time. You've not solved any problem, because the majority of the people in that country are not on board with your platform. They don't believe in what you
education in the military leaders of America really think that they could go into that country.
Well, the problem is Afghanistan is not a country. People say, oh, Afghanistan, the nation of Afghanistan. No, Afghanistan is not a country. Somalia is not a country. They're a collection of provinces ruled by tribal warlords. Why do you think they've been fighting each other for 2,000 years? Because one doesn't believe in this exact same interpretation of the Quran as the other? Maybe. But mostly it's about control of terrain and territory, controlling people, controlling goat herds, controlling natural resources, which is the country's rich in them, but they can't extract it because they don't have the technology. Anything more complicated than the bolt action on a Kalashnikov is like mind-boggling to these people, unless you're a bomb maker. So if you don't have a population, as you said, educated enough to understand that the world changes, it evolves. You have to evolve with it or be left behind. They don't mind being left behind. And when you have a mindset like that, you can't change that mindset by bombing them, educating their women, making a few judges, or paving their roads. They don't care. That's not, dude, they're killing people for playing radios. You're not going to change their mindset. You can't. And the fact that you even try shows that there's a lack of intellectual component in that thought process. I mean, you can't go into a country that's so medieval and backward. I think you're going to, in a few years, turn it into a modern world-class democracy, maybe even a second world democracy, maybe living on some foreign aid. You can't do that with these people. They've proven it time and again. It's time to wash your hands of it and say, you know what? If you want to be a backward goat herd, that's fine. That's on you.
They even turn on their own families if the family member becomes a Christian or something like that, and they'll chain them up and force them to reconvert or just kill them. It's barbaric, a lot of the society there.
Well, that's why anytime you go into a country that does not believe in secular government, you have a problem. Okay? If you have a country that is so inundated with a single religious ideology to where the entire lifestyle of I'll use the term nation, but it's not really a nation. The entire mindset of a region is controlled by the doctrine of one faith. That's a very dangerous thing. Martin Luther knew that. Okay, Martin Luther knew that. He wasn't exactly the great stand-up guy that everybody thought he was. Hell, he wanted to get Jews out of Germany and Europe and confiscate their property and get rid of them. He didn't think the Jews were worth a damn either. Most people don't teach that about Martin Luther. But what he did, though, was he proved that the Catholic Church, with its singular authority, was detrimental to the ambitions and the goodwill of mankind, that man needed to have another avenue. Why is the Catholic Church the one-all be-all of getting to heaven? Why should the Catholic Church be the primary component of levying taxes, of determining who's king and who's pope? No, I've got a different idea. So he comes up with an alternative plan called the Reformation. And then, of course, that is the tidal wave of movements to spawn a century of warfare, the rise of nation states, independent of the Catholic Church. So that had a positive outcome in a way in the wake of a century of warfare that was misery for a lot of people. The 30 Years' War being a prime example. I mean, you had the rise of a guy like Gustavus Adolphus, the king of Sweden. I mean, one of the great military geniuses of all time. Had there not been a Reformation, you'd have never heard of Gustavus Adolphus a century later.
When it comes to history, and you've dedicated your whole life pretty much military and history, when do you know for sure something happened versus doubts? When do you challenge the historical narrative, and are there any things that you do challenge in terms of old time history?
Always challenge. Never accept anything on face value, ever. When I do interviews with people, I've interviewed hundreds of people. When I interview someone, that's one source. If they have letters, diaries, documentation, that's another source. If there's an archive document someplace that confirms and corroborates what they say, that's another source. Anytime you take oral histories, you have I've had people deceive me during interviews. You just don't know if what they're telling you is true sometimes. You don't know. especially Nazi Germany. I mean, you start talking to an SS colonel and he starts telling you all this stuff. And then is he going to really admit to you that, yeah, I gunned down about 120 people outside of, in Belarus because I had orders to do so? Is he going to admit that to you? Maybe, maybe not. You don't know. But never stop questioning. It's like history is like science. Science and medicine are the quest for embetterment, the quest for knowledge, to achieve a higher realm of knowledge about something. History should be no different. I mean, history should be the pursuit of fact above and beyond speculation and hypothesis. If you have information, fine, track it down. Go as far as you can with it. And then when you hit a wall, when you've hit the last piece of paper, you've hit the last interview, when you play that tape and you've got that information corroborated by this, then you can publish it as accepted history. And I use accepted history because we know now, decades after books have been written, certain things were wrong because of new information being really held. Hell, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Soviet archives opened up, and there's stuff in there that nobody knew anything about. Books had to be, rewritten. New books were written, exposing a lot of this new information, especially about the NKVD, Lavrentiy Beria's operation, Stalin's discourses and things like that. So we have a lot of information coming out all the time, which was not previously available to Western historians. And nobody in the Soviet Union was going to write anything detrimental about Stalin or Khrushchev or Brezhnev because, Solzhenitsyn was experienced the repercussions of that mindset. But you're always learning new things. I've been doing this history business almost all my life. And you run across somebody, you come across a document, or somebody else publishes a book that they had access to a document. I've written books where people emailed me and said, hey, I never knew this. I'm a professor here, or I've written these books, but this information you found contradicts or challenges or supports what I wrote or believed. So, it's an ongoing process. It never stops. It never stops. And the moment you think you have all the answers is the day that you have zero credibility in the business.
So how much of a risk and how much have you seen, if you've seen any, processes being applied to history similarly to the Ministry of Truth in 1984, George Orwell's 19...
Well, look in America. Look at the 1619 project that these idiots come up with to supplement and supplant, rather, I should say, the 1776 project that Donald Trump came up with. Basically, what we have in this country is they're wanting to rewrite history, alter history. And the great liberal mantra is that their platform is that we are a racist country based upon our past. The problem is, and I did this argument, you'll love this. Your listeners are going to love this. Okay, pay attention, people. I had a debate with three people at one time. I had a debate with three people about this very subject a few years ago, before the woke thing even surfaced. And they were talking about how we need to have reparations to the descendants of slaves in this country because of the centuries of slavery. And I said, well, how far back do you want to go? And one of them did mention 1619 Jamestown, the first Black African to be brought to the New World, and therefore we need to have reparations for slavery. I said, okay, fine. So you want to take the people who originated African slavery and make their descendants pay for their descendants, maybe or maybe not having slaves. Yes, that's true. Okay, fine. Well, let's go to the origins of the African slave trade. Let's dismiss the fact that African tribes were enslaving their brothers and sisters for centuries, long before the white man ever set foot in Africa. So let's look at it this way. If you want to start getting reparations from people, then you need to go to Lisbon, Portugal. Well, why Lisbon? Well, in right around 1443, I believe, or so, Prince Henry the Navigator brought back the first African slave to Portugal and said, hey, look what I got. There are a lot more of them, too, and they do cheap labor. So Lisbon started the African trade, what we call today the African slave trade. The Portuguese did it. Then the Spanish picked up on it. And the Portuguese and the Spanish, they started their colonies in South America, began importing, millions of slaves to do the hard work. And then the British got on board, the French got on board, the Danes got on board, the Dutch. Everybody got involved in the slave trade because it was good business. But in 1619, when the first black man was brought here as a slave, we were not a country. We were a colony of the British Empire, which was not even British then. It was English, because the Act of Union of 1707 created the United Kingdom. So there was no Britain in 1619. It was England. Okay. So here you go. Now you have to go to London, petition Parliament, and say, we would like you to pay about 10 billion pounds sterling to help for reparations of the colonials who were your brethren who basically imported blacks from Africa during the transatlantic slave trade. If you do that in Lisbon, Madrid, or London, you're going to hear the laughter echoing before you get back to America. Okay. So therefore, your argument falls flat.
Well, it's going to be about 2 trillion or something like that. I mean, I don't. That's
well, some ridiculous damn number. But I told them, I said, I tell you what I'm going to do. And I pulled out my credit card. I said, "Here's what I'm doing. You see this? At that time, it's a Gold American Express. You find me one person alive right now who had a grandparent who was a slave, and I will max this card out. No spending limit on it. And I'll buy them a house. I'll buy them a plot of land, 40 acres and a damn mule. Find me one person with a grandparent who was a slave." Well, that's unfair. And I'm like, sure it is. You want people to pay reparations to descendants of slaves. Well, find me somebody who's a living descendant of someone who was a slave. Find me someone. Because last I heard, in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation basically led to the freeing of slaves. And after the Civil War, slavery was over and slaves became U.S. citizens. So we took corrective action on that. We corrected our error. We're not a perfect country. No country is. But at least we put forth the effort to make changes that progressed our nation into a more homogenous, unilateral type of environment. Unilateral in the sense that we're not betrothed to European powers, but that we're homogenous in the fact that we do pull together in time of need. We do come together in time of strife. And I think that with the laws that have been passed and with the fact that for you liberal idiots who want to say, well, America is a systemically racist country. Well, for a racist country, we're doing a pretty piss poor job of it because we had a black president. We have a black vice president. At least she says she's black. We have a black Supreme Court. We have black justices on the Supreme Court. We have black police chiefs, black mayors. We have black politicians, senators, and members of Congress and the House of Representatives. So if we're a racist country, we really screwed up on that process. So why don't you educate us on how to be a better racist? Because we didn't do a good job. And they tend to get a little upset with me about that. So,
Cool, man. Well, Colin, I think this has been a really great episode. I really thank you for your time. Love to have you on the show again, but I think that we've got a lot to chew on. And but just before we come to a close, do you think there's any good news or any hope for the world, or anything we can do to help the cause of freedom and republic and democracy? Otherwise, I was going to go home and cry. It's been fascinating, though.
Yeah, I think there is. I think that once people in these various countries, especially my country, and I don't want to sound, egotistical, but whichever way America bends, the world goes. The free world, anyway. Because we are the largest economy, we are the largest military power, and that was by accident and design at the same time. And hopefully, because if the United States in the last century has freed more people from bondage, slavery, and threat of persecution in the last century than have been free in the last 5,000 years of recorded history. There are billions alive today who would never even been born if we hadn't gotten involved in 2 world wars. So, and the people who are logical and lucid know that. The people who don't know that or ignore that are the idiots. And I wish them well, but close your mind and close your doors, because government's coming after you too. Yeah, there is hope. Once we get this cesspool, this quagmire of lack of meritocracy out of Washington, and we get some intelligent people in there who care more about individual freedom than they do about lining their pockets, then I think we're going to see a major change in the world. And it starts with the U.S. It always has since World War II. And we have to be the leader of the world, and not just military power or economic power. We have to be the leader of the world in moral power. We have to show a moral and a moral compass and a sense of integrity that is unimpeachable. Right now, we don't have that. We just lost it. In the last few days, we just lost all credibility that we ever had because of one man and his sycophants. And it's going to be hard to get that back. It's going to be hard. And I don't blame the world for not trusting us. Hell, I live in this damn country and I don't trust it. Okay. And I feel sorry for the people that have suffered as a result. I really do, because I've seen suffering. I've seen suffering, man. I've seen horror. I've seen people do things to people in countries I can't even talk to you about. And I just wish people well, and I wish people would go away from this podcast and just remember two things. Get up in the morning and think about what can you do that's good for someone else, and then think about what can you do to prevent harm to anyone for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. If you can take those two things away, then I think you'll be a pretty decent person.
I think you've got a powerful voice, and for this time, I don't know if you're a religious man. I wonder if I could say a little prayer for you.
I'm not religious, but I'm not anti-religious, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
I totally believe in the freedom of religion. I believe people should be left alone to believe what they want to believe, as long as they don't behead people and start torturing people because of honor killings. As long as you don't hurt people because of religion, I don't care what you believe.
Okay, cool. Okay, I'll say a quick prayer for you then. Dear Father in heaven, I pray for Colin. I pray for his son, that you'll protect his son as he goes into Congress and tries to get into Congress. I pray that you'd help Colin, give him wisdom, use him for purposes of truth and righteousness, and that his voice and wisdom would be used for good in Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. My girlfriend would love to hear that. She's a church-going type. So I'm not. I kind of lost that a long time ago. I just don't have it.
If we can talk about this outside of the podcast if you're interested, but I've been through a lot this last year that's really kind of brought me back to it. So,
well, let's talk about you getting Max on to talk about his prospects for a better America at some point.
Yeah, I'm up for it. Yeah,
you'll find him quite an interesting character. Believe me. He doesn't hold back, and he'll have to watch his words. But yeah, he's a very vocal opponent of idiocy. He's seen what idiocy. He's seen idiocy kill people, and so yeah, you'll enjoy him. He'll be enlightening to a lot of people who aren't familiar with the brunt, brash, and very in-your-face analogist type of speech that that Marine gives. He'll give it to you. You ask him a straight question, you get a straight answer. There's no dancing around like a politician. That's why he's not a politician. He wants to go in, clean things up, and get the hell out. Give them term limits so they can't keep getting elected as perpetual professional politicians.
That for me is a mark of a great leader. Somebody who doesn't. For me, if you want to be a leader for being the sake of a leader, don't be a leader, because that is a perversion of leadership. I think leadership is a bit like the Dark Knight. He's there when there's trouble. Gotham needs him. He steps up and he does his job. I think that's the same with like leadership. It's a tool, and once the job's done, you can go back to your peaceful life.
Well, there's an old saying that you might agree with. It says, "Good leaders step up when the time warrants. Bad leaders have to be removed." Okay, so good leaders know when it's time to go. That's why George Washington did his 2 terms and says, "No, I've done enough. It's time for other people to lead the country." And he didn't want to be a king. He didn't want to be a professional politician. The founding fathers did not believe in professional politicians. That's why Congress only met 3 or 4 times a year. It wasn't a full-time job. They only came together when they had to debate shit and pass laws. They didn't sit there and draw a paycheck all the time. They didn't even get paid that much. It was service to the country in lieu of profit. Now it's all about service to the country for the sake of profit or the hope of profit. That's what Max wants to kill. And he has a great platform. You're going to love him. Go to his website. I could email it to you.
It's looking good. It's looking good. Yeah. Cool. So when can we see your movie with your movie you're collaborating with advising Spielberg?
Well, we're still the Spielberg series. I don't know when that's going to be released. They're still filming episodes. So I don't, it's a series called Whirlwind, and I don't know when it's going to be released. I don't even know where it's going to be released. I would assume it's going to be on streaming somewhere. but it's based upon the book Masters of the Air. And that's a good book. If you want to read a good book. And it's a good story, true story about the 100th Bomb Group, basically, in World War II. But I don't know. I have to let you know.
And what was the other movie you're talking about? The other thing?
Whirlwind is the series they're filming now based upon the book Masters of the Air. They just changed the title for the series. Now, my other project for my book, The Star of Africa, is a different story altogether. I mean, that's about a German fighter pilot who became a national hero and but became affectionately, if not beloved and respected by his enemies, who really was a remarkable guy and who anti-Nazi to his core, but because he was of such good propaganda value, they just looked the other way to like, well, okay, he doesn't like us, but he's doing good work. So but anyway, but that book did pretty well. And now we're working with producers and directors, and we even have a couple of music composers for the screenplay score and scripts being edited.
That's a book that you wrote?
Yeah, it's one of the books I wrote, The Star of Africa.
And it's been turned into a movie.
Yeah, we're working on it. We're just waiting to get the final funding approval, and then we have the executive producer position, hopefully filled with Dale Dye, maybe. And producers in Australia, a producer in Germany, a possibly producer here as well, and putting all that together, we have acting talent. I did get John Connie. I got John Connie. I mean, he wants to do it. He wants to play the older Matthias role.
I don't even know who that is, man. Sorry, I'm just totally out of touch with the celeb names and stuff.
Well, John Connie's been an actor for the past 50 years. He's if you're too young to remember a movie called The Wild Geese, back in 1977. It was the ultimate man movie. The starring cast was Richard Harris, Richard Burton, Roger Moore, Hardy Kruger. I mean, it was just massive. Well, John Connie was in that movie as well. And he was also in the Marvel Comics movie Black Panther. He played the King in that movie, which I've not seen. I hate comic book movies, but I know he was in it. And The Ghost in the Darkness with Val Kilmer and Michael Douglas. He played the old black chief that was narrating the film throughout that's portrayed in the movie. That's John Connie. And John Connie has a personal connection to the story because the black subject in my book, Matthew Lutuku, was a South African corporal captured by the Germans. But after Marseille learned about the Holocaust, he was afraid for Lutuku's safety. So he made his other pilots, swear to help protect him if anything happened to him. Well, after Marseille died, they kept their word and protected him from going to a camp and possibly being killed in North Africa. And so it's a good story. It's a good story. It has all the components and full of interviews that I did too with Australians, Germans, people like that, a South African and pilot who fought each other. But there was a lot of mutual respect. They feared Marseille. He was only 22 when he died, but they feared the hell out of him. But they respected him for his humanity because he did try and save the men he shot down. And when he could, he would fly to their base and drop a note and say, "Hey, I shot your guy down. He's wounded badly. Go get him. He's going to die." Or if he killed somebody, then he would say, "Well, this is where your man is. Go get his body because he shouldn't be missing in action. His family should know what happened." So it's a legendary
story. The radio
story.
frequencies or like?
No, they couldn't really. Jumping onto an enemy radio frequency was not really was not really suggested. But then again, the frequency modulations between the British and American equipment versus the German was a very, very narrow bandwidth. But the British and Australian intelligence did have the radios to where they could pipe into German transmissions. And bear in mind, this is 1942. By that time, the Enigma code had been broken. And so Bletchley Park had done their job. So even coded messages could be read. But normally they just listened over the radios. They could hear what the Germans in the air were talking about. And they would write down things like, okay, who's this guy? Native German speakers who fled Germany in the 30s would be monitoring the radios, writing in English. They'd be writing notes like, okay, who's Jochen? Who's Werner? Who's this guy? All this, what's this? Okay. They would write all this stuff down. And over time, they pieced it all together to figure out, okay, who's this guy in this Messerschmitt marked yellow 14 dropping these notes on our airfield? Then they piece it together because they see a picture on the cover of a magazine with his plane in the background. Oh, that's him. So it's a good story. It's a good story. It's legendary to those who know military aviation history, especially World War II aviation history. But many books have been written about Marseille, 7 biographies, I believe. Mine was like the last one, I think. But mine was heavily packed with interviews with the people who flew with him in combat and those who flew against him, and 2 he shot down and survived.
I think speaking to you like on history and seeing how much you love the topic, it seems like history can be a drug in a sense, because it's just the more you get good at it, the more that you understand it, the more exciting it becomes. But the less history you know, the less interesting it is. But if you spend your whole life doing it, then your brain just learns to absorb facts and remember them. And it's sort of good feedback loop, and you must continue to enjoy it, you know?
Oh, I do. I enjoyed it a lot. And my own family history goes back 1,400 years. I mean, there's a lot of family history that I know, and it's interesting to me. But I would say being a historian versus being a history enthusiast is the same as being somebody who goes to the beach and then being a deep sea oceanographer. You can sit on the beach and look at the water and go, great. Or you're a deep sea oceanographer and you're at the bottom of the ocean looking at wild things and crazy new critters and looking at wrecks on the ocean floor. And that is the in-depth interest you have in the ocean versus someone just looking at it, watching kids play in the water. The enthusiast watches the water. The deep historian goes deep and digs into the stuff and sees what he can find.
The only thing that history is lacking is a time machine. I'm sure every historian would love to be able to go back and.
Dude, man, I've had this discussion too, man. Don't even get me started on time machine stuff. H.G. Wells, you're my hero, dude. Let me tell you, if I had a time machine, I have a list of people that I want to sit down and have a beer with. I can tell you that right now. And I'll leave it at that. But there are some people in history that I want to talk to.
Yeah. Well, being a man of faith myself, I believe that some things like that will happen.
Well, Einstein said it could happen. Einstein said it could happen. I mean, and he was a pretty bright guy. I figured that every scientific fact started out as a theory somewhere, you know?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well,
it's like the first guy who made fire. I'm sure he was the most popular dude in the tribe. So the first guy who rubbed sticks together and got that thing smoldering, man, I'm sure he was like the CEO of Flame. And I think the same thing with history and technology. I don't think you can separate history from technology, because if you look at the history of technology, situations dictated the terms of why things were invented in many cases. I wrote a book about it called Night Fighters, that because of the RAF and the Luftwaffe fighting each other with Bomber Command versus the German Night Fighter Command, because of that 4-year process of German fighters whacking out British bombers and vice versa, and the evolution of nocturnal aerial warfare, that created a scientific revolution that had been unparalleled to this day in human history. It even beat out the atomic weapons research in its rapidity, because the British had radar, then the Germans had radar, then the British had airborne radar. The Germans developed better airborne radar. Then the British created H2S to detect the sound of engines long range, and the Germans detected systems to determine if there was actual gas fumes in the air from a bomber formation, a stream. The technology, and then you had all this technology that developed so people could kill people, and the end results of that technology after World War II you live with today: weather radar, police having radar on the highways, microwave ovens, transistor radios. All this technology evolved because of 2 countries trying to kill each other in the dark of night.
That's one of the weird things about history that frustrate me, is that we, in a sense, we needed, I don't want to say needed, but like you said, useful technology came out of these wars. It's a horrible fact of life, you know?
Well, it's like this. It's like you build a new car, you drive it at high speed, you miss a turn, you hit a tree, you crush the car, you kill the occupants. But what did you learn from it? You need a stronger damn car, or seatbelts, or an airbag. So every tragedy, hopefully, will have a positive outcome. And we're human beings. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to make bad decisions. I have 3 ex-wives. Trust me, we all make bad decisions. Okay. Living with those and making things better as a result is what makes us superior specimens to all other living organisms. Okay, all animals learn from their mistakes. We're the only species that fails to consistently learn, and we repeatedly will make the same mistakes over and over. If a wolf goes into a trap, it knows later on that if it gets out of that trap, if it sees the same damn thing again, it's not going to put its paw in it. It's not going to put his face in it. And animals are smarter than we are, because predatory animals in packs or in prides, the dumbest of the species doesn't lead the damned organism. Okay. The brightest and strongest guy is a guy running stuff. It may not be egalitarian, it may be totalitarian, but they don't choose the most stupid person to run the operation. But we will, so we don't always learn, but there's always hope.
Good. Cool. Well, on that note, Colin, thanks very much for your time, and would love to have you on again when time happens and the time's good for you. But thanks so much for everything.
No problem. And I'll send you Max's contact information so you can have that too.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
You got it, man. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Nikos Show. I trust you enjoyed its content and were transported on an adventure. If you are a world-class expert in your field, or you know one, please get in touch. I'm also looking for long-term partners to sponsor the show. Please share with your friends if you like this episode, and please leave a rating and leave a review if you haven't done already. See you again soon. Nikos out. Bye-bye.